Hello and welcome everybody to the Casual Spikes podcast, episode 29, the SCG Atlanta Spotlight Series review episode. We got a bunch of information from the first ever Spotlight Series. We had a ton of players show up. Of course, only one could win, and winning a very unique prize on top of all the normal stuff that we would get from these giant open tournaments, invites to the Pro Tour, and of course a $10,000 cash prize. It actually ended up being a $50K event, as I found out. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean it was super cool. It definitely had the feel of GPs of old. So if you're old like me and Dakota here, where you remember the GPs and back in my day, so it was really cool to see like that kind of thing. I think there was 1,400 players that came out for this, or I think it was over 1,400
It
players,
was
but
just shy of 1,500 players. I think it was like 1,475 or like 1,485 to
Jesus,
play
that is
standard.
yeah, to play, which is wild. If you were to tell me like 2 years ago that there would be a tournament where 1,500 players came out to play standard, like paid to play standard, I would have told you you're high on crack.
Yeah, I mean, standard,
Like,
I think, has gotten a bad rap for a while. Oh my God, Will Howard's going to score a touchdown. By the way, never mind, he's not going to. By the way, we are recording this while the semifinals for the college football playoff are. There's going to be roughly 1 to 2 people in our audience that probably even give a shit. So if I crash out or start celebrating randomly, it's because we're either winning or losing. So sorry. And apparently I'm
but
ahead of my wife, so now I'm gonna get yelled at.
well, at least you know.
I'm not a
Um,
religious
but
man, but pray for me.
but yeah, it was a huge tournament. It was crazy, that we got so much. People came out to play standard, which is just wild. Like you were saying, standard got a bad rap, and I think the real bad rap that standard got is the fact that it was all on. Um, what the? Okay. The fact that it was all on Arena basically, and Arena was kind of taking over standard. There's no such thing as paper standard for probably about well, not 3 years now because we had an RC for standard, but like prior to, like before the RCU season kind of like started incorporating standard, like for the last like 3 years before that, like standard just wasn't playable. Like you didn't like standard cards were dirt cheap because no one bought them, right? Like the cards that got bought were the cards we're seeing play in eternal formats. That's why we see like not Mockingbird, the Legislator was like a $20-$25 card for the longest time because it was the only reason to open up those packs. Same thing with the Surveil Lands and the Triomes and the and Shieldred. Those are the only cards worth opening up in that pack. If you open up any of the rare, it was pointless. You weren't going to play it in Standard. It was too terrible to play in Pioneer, and Modern doesn't count because it's not. It's definitely not powerful enough. If you're not playing it in Pioneer, you're not playing it in Modern. So like you had basically every rare in the sets were the bulk rares unless they were either good in Commander, like good in Pioneer, or good in Modern. And I don't think there was any rares that we're seeing play in Legacy. I mean outside of lands maybe. Um, feel free to flame me and tell me I'm wrong because I just don't know. I don't keep up with Legacy anymore. It's too expensive for me, and nowhere around here plays it. So there's just like multiple reasons for me not to keep up with it.
Yeah, I think before we actually get into Atlanta and everything, I think the big thing for competitive Magic and why this is kind of like a big moment for us, at the beginning of 2025, is the fact that with unfortunately COVID happening and everything and shutting down the country and of course all these restrictions and how long it kind of took to open back up, it became unfeasible, I would say, to have like these large public gatherings. It was a lot easier for players to just play on Arena, and if you wanted to play these older formats, there was Moto, there was a few different ways you could play, so on. And we essentially lost all this stuff. And as kind of like everything's kind of opened up, and of course standard as itself really wasn't that good of a
Healthy.
meta game or anything like that, and healthy also.
Yeah.
Well, I guess
Well, I
it's
mean,
kind of the same, but
we had what 3 or 4 bannings in standard at one point in time, like which was wild to have. Like, standard was just a very unhealthy place. It was very what was it? It was very one deck linear, where like as we go through and talk about what happens at the Spotlight series, you'll see all these different archetypes that are viable. Like that wasn't the case when standard kind of switched over to arena only, and so like it got a bad rap from that. It got a bad rap from the other things going on. It's just a lot of negatives happened. COVID happened. That was a huge thing. I mean, COVID killed the gathering of Magic. Like that was the whole purpose of Magic the Gathering is, you went to these tournaments to go see your friends. You went to these tournaments to go, win. Obviously, you were trying to win, trying to do things. You were getting, artist signatures, getting cards you couldn't find, special cards, whatever. Like you did all these things to gather mostly. Like obviously you had, your spikes, your people who went there to grind a tournament, but even people who go to grind tournaments don't just go by themselves. You make friends along the way. You have to, otherwise you're gonna be bored out of your mind. There's only so many times you can look at the same vendors selling the same cards that you're not gonna buy. And I don't mean that because they're too expensive or they're bad or whatever. It's just like you as a Magic player are not just gonna like, I'm gonna buy every single card I see.
Hmm.
I'm homeless now.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care how rich you are, you can't buy every single Magic card you see. No one is Elon Musk or Bill Gates kind of money where you're just like, yeah, I dropped $12 billion today.
Yeah.
Like, because that's what it would take to like just go to a convention. Like, yeah, I bought every card I saw,
Yeah.
just all of them.
Definitely, I would say like the TLDR of like of all this mini rant, I guess, impromptu, I might add. Essentially, like even before we had COVID, Standard sucked. Pioneer was like the new hot thing, and it looked great in its first ever like huge event. Modern, of course, was as popular as ever, and then with like a lack of big tournaments, I think competitive Magic really suffered. It was hard to get a collection going on Arena, that sort of thing. And we fast forward, a few years later, where 2022, I would say that we started getting these bigger events, but they didn't really mean anything. Like, yeah, you could win a lot of money. Sure, you get a lot of clout, things like that, Star City hosting things, but there really wasn't anything. We started getting RCQs and this RC circuit, and that was really cool. And then, like, the coverage, iffy, whatever, done by people that really didn't necessarily care about Magic, except for like the people wanting to put on a good show. We get to 2024, and this cycle, RCQs here recently, and RCs, SCG has been doing this for a while, has just absolutely took it to a whole new level, gotten people in there that really care about the product and what's going on, and of course with the people for pro play and organized play really just stepping up and keep pushing it, like, okay, can we get this back, can we do this, can we do that, and proving that that's exactly what the players wanted and listening to the players, which has been awesome, leading us to this moment right here. The virtual return of a Grand Prix, essentially. We talked about it before in the last episode. Essentially, these style of events, if you're not able to kind of go through the RCQ circuit, which kind of incentivizes you a lot to grind and play in RCQ tournaments, because obviously the more you play, the better chances you have to win. And of course, if you go to an RC, you could do worse technically than you can at a spotlight event and still qualify for the Pro Tour. But this is a way that like you just have one tournament where you do very well, you can get some big cash prizes, Pro Tour invite, and first place. This is kind of a new thing, them getting a very unique prize, which I found out is going to change for the various spotlight series too.
Oh, okay. So the first place prize is gonna be different each time.
Yeah, so
I
there's
guess, I guess that makes sense because like I know the spotlights are always going to be standard focus. So I'm sure like if you have a Pioneer or I guess modern, we'll go with modern, right? If you have a modern spotlight series, first place getting essentially a case of standard for all these standard sets of this year isn't really something you're super excited about as a modern player if like you only focus on modern. Like, do cards from standard trickle into modern? 100%. That's we've seen it happen ad nauseum.
Mhm.
But the problem is like we have a 250 card set. Maybe if we're lucky, if we're super lucky, 10 of those cards we'll see play in modern.
Yeah.
Realistically, 5 or less are going to see play in modern, and a lot of times 2 or 3 of those are going to be like, "Hey, we got upgraded sideboard cards now to where we were playing this card that was printed like 5 years ago, but now this card says also draw a card on it for the same exact mana value, so it's better."
Yeah.
Or like, we'll get something like that where like we have upgraded these cards, so like, yes, there's cards you wanted, but it was 50-cent cards. Like we got this common that's really good now in our sideboard for specific matchups that we don't always play in our sideboards, but when we do, we now play this common.
Yeah, I think there's a modern one in Utrecht in February is the next Spotlight series, and I think that one is focusing on modern pretty heavily. I think the promos for that are modern cards. So what exactly is going to be first prize for that event? Who knows? But we know that at least the next two that are going to be in the United States, there's going to be one in Denver that is going to be focused on limited, and it's going to be for like Dragonstorm or whatever, the Khans of Tarkir set, like the revisit of like that set. So I'm assuming that the prize is going to have something to do with that. And then there's going to be one in Indianapolis come like the end of May, beginning of June, which is going to focus on secret layers. So we could probably surmise that whatever that event ends up being, that the grand prize on top of everything is going to be something to do with like the secret layers.
Yeah, that'd be my guess is, excuse me, that it's gonna be someone with secret layers. Obviously, not knowing more than that, I didn't even know that information had been given out, so I haven't been up to date on my Spotlight series information. I've been trying to play Moto while it lags out indefinitely, so
I mean, the only reason why I even know that is because thankfully they announced all that stuff before it was my bedtime that day. So
nice. Yeah, I tried to watch the Spotlight series, but I was also visiting my girlfriend at the time, and so trying to watch that while also spend quality time was a little more challenging than I would like to admit.
yeah,
Turns out that like Magic is not the end all be all of the world.
don't tell that to anybody else. Don't ever say that to me again. They better not throw that flag. So oh shoot, of course they did anyway. I had something I was gonna say, and then I had to stop myself from crashing out like absolutely. So I apologize for that. But yeah, so the Spotlight series so far is a rousing success. We talked about how bad Standard had been for a while, and really it started to be really good. I think in the past like 6 months to maybe even a year, if you want to stretch back that far. At least the Standard sets that they were releasing, great, awesome. So we've culminated into the beginning of 2025. The first major Spotlight Series tournament is going to feature Standard as the event, and of course the grand prize being a case of every Standard Lego booster that's released in 2025, everything like that. Almost 1,500 players register for that tournament.
Yes.
Massive. They're like, I've been to Grand Prix that have had like 1,700-1,800 people to like play Modern, and Modern is like has always seemed to be like a super popular format that everybody wants to play. And this is like Standard coming at a point where, yeah, we haven't had these events in a while, but it's Standard. At this point people have grown to hate the format if they're not already invested in on Arena.
Yeah. It is kind of crazy because like we see this usually where like formats have their cap, right? Like people who like Pioneer, people who like Modern, and people who like Standard haven't found Modern or Pioneer yet.
Mm-hmm.
Is usually like the old joke is that people who play Standard is usually because they don't know the other older formats exist. Um, and so it is crazy that the Standard went from essentially what people would call unplayable or not interesting or whatever you want to call it, or reasons they don't play it, to we have now a 1,500 player tournament, um, which is just wild that we've Wizards has successfully turned Standard around into this. And we'll get down to the archetype breakdown of day one here in a second, but they had I think listed over like 15 different archetypes that
Mm-hmm.
made enough of a percentage to matter, and it's just like crazy that we're seeing all these different archetypes being viable, and it's not like we're seeing where like, well, I took Teamer Otters to this tournament and then no one made it to day two on Teamer Otters. Like
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing all these viable, like, all these decks transfer over into day two. Now some of them did better, some of them did worse, obviously depending on luck of the draw, player skill ability, things like that. All these, like, there's all different factors, but like
Mm-hmm.
nobody who anybody who took a list, like a specific list, was like, no one was laughed out of the tournament for taking one of these 15 lists. No one's like, what, you're playing Burrow's Burn? What are you, an idiot? Like, no one's saying. I'm sure someone's saying that, but no one's saying that. Like, this isn't uh a huge deal essentially.
Oh my
uh
god.
did Ohio State score?
They got a strip sack on 4th and goal and scored a touchdown. And now my wife is coming out here because she absolutely loves me, and I love college football again.
Did Ohio
The
State
Casual Spikes podcast is no longer an MTG stream anymore. It is now college football. We're going to be talking about the Natty, Ohio State by 50.
Jesus Christ.
And that guy earned it too.
uh
So I'm sorry about that. You know, people come here for magic, but I'm telling you what, this is basically third Christmas for me. Texas people crying, believe it or not, is like second on my list of things that I love seeing. First would be holding a Pro Tour trophy. Second is people from Texas crying. Absolutely love it. Goated, undefeated. I'm just saying. Third,
Oh my
third is Notre
God.
Dame people crying when we crush them by like 48 in the national championship, and then Will Howard has a crash out on his offensive lineman like AJ McCarron did back with his center. God, I
All
love
right.
college football. All right,
So for the 10 people who maybe got that of the 20 people that watch this podcast,
no, Dakota was gonna have a bad time if Texas would have scored. Dakota probably would have been grumpy and just been like, "Who cares? Like, let's talk about standing on the edge of the shower when it's still running. Like, how long could you balance for? Me? I don't know. Am I gonna bang my head off the sink? Probably. I'm just saying, like, I'm gonna be I'm gonna be surfboarding on that thing. But
real quick aside, you're a Browns fan, right?
oh yeah, trust me,
How do you survive that?
it's easy. When you've been molded by the pain, like that's why you have to be an Ohio State fan. You know, like you're used to the Browns losing, so when Ohio State's winning and the Browns are winning, it's like euphoric. Like someone could literally like kidnap my dog, and I'd be like, I'll find him when I find him, because like life's good, you know. But then I turn into John Wick when as soon as I start to care, you know. So you gotta take the good with the bad.
We're gonna move into the
Yeah,
breakdown of
well, here
the game.
before we move into the breakdown, honestly, truly, because
Okay.
I always occasionally forget to do this, and I had been a good boy about it, and I'm gonna be a good boy about it now. If you're
Okay.
watching this, typically we do not record normally during the college football playoff stuff, and thankfully the Natty is going to be on Monday. But if you want to see more content, if at any point you're entertained by us, you know, the Casual Spikes here on this channel, it would be greatly appreciated if you would consider hitting that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you are notified of future episodes that get released of the Casual Spikes podcast. Also, leave a comment, leave a like on the video. Helps with the algorithm, gets people suggested the content and everything. Even though it seems like a load of nonsense for like the first, I think it's like 15, 20 minutes of this podcast. We do actually get into some pretty good analytical breakdown, which you will be seeing here in a moment. And if at any point you decide, hey, I really like these guys, you know, Randy looks pretty handsome, you know, I'd say sometimes he kind of is, not going to lie. The mustache does things for me. You can go down in the description below and you can get a link to our you'll find a links to both of our YouTube channels. Randy, you know, does the magic thing over there. I also do the magic thing there. So if you need more of it, you need more of it in your life. You want to try qualifying for these regional championships. You want to know what's going on at these spotlight series. You got to subscribe. You got to ring that notification bell. You got to help us out and get the word out there.
Yes.
All right, Randy. Since I know you're just dying to talk about the meta game.
I am. I think the metagame's a little different, like a little different than what we expected it to be. I also was a little wrong about my prediction about Esper Pixies. Um, but I was right about Model White tokens, so I'm happy about that. But so the most played deck or most registered deck was the Mirror mid range at 210 people registered it, 14% of the meta share. Pretty much no one's surprised by that. We had both said in the last podcast that we thought Demir and then insert red aggro deck is going to be the next best one, whether it was going to be Gruul, Boros, or just mono red itself. And then when you know it, Gruul aggro was also the second one at 205 copies, also at 14% meta share. So I'm sure they're doing some rounding there in their numbers. But,
Mhm.
so basically the top two most played decks or most registered decks were basically the same number. Like we're 5 decks off. Like it's the same number.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
close enough, honestly.
what surprised me was number three for sure. Golgari midrange was registered at 124 players, what 9%.
Hmm.
Um, I'm surprised by that because I think Golgari midrange has fallen way far down, and we'll talk more about this like when it comes to day two. But like all the different like bounce strategies that are running around right now, Golgari is trash at. Like it's
Hmm.
just bad. Like the fact that when your opponent can just like end a turn, this town ain't big enough, bounce your play you did, bounce one of their spells, trigger beanstalks, draw cards, like you just fell behind. Like
Hmm.
your opponent just 2 for 1 you to 3 for 1 you, and like you're just not recovering from that.
Yeah,
and it's wild how bad it is.
yeah, Gogori definitely the fall off needs to be studied, as the kids would say. This was at a time I think maybe a month or two ago for us, like when we actually had some gameplay showing off some of these decks. That
Yeah.
Gogori and Demir were 1 and 2, and really for a long time I think it was like a kind of A and B basically. Like they both kind of deserve their spot at the top of the metagame. They both did things that were very powerful and interacted very well with the various other things going on in the format, and also interacting very well against each other. And the fact that, mid range definitely still hanging in there, but we can obviously tell now that it is not nearly as close as what it was even a month ago.
No, so I've been doing better game breakdowns of like the weekends past, like every weekend for probably a month or two now, on my channel. So like if you want to check that out for standard, it's really good information for like if you're planning to go to RCQs and stuff. Now, obviously, it's not perfect information because your local meta can be really different. I know, like going way back to when we were doing RCQs for Pioneer, if you were looking at the Pioneer meta breakdown, the visit was like 3%. And if you went anywhere in Michigan, it was 80% of the tournament every time. I definitely didn't almost think, blow my brains out. Uh, anyway, but like so, but it's a very good idea to get what people are playing, what the new hotness is, kind of break down what's going on. I kind of go over, excuse me, any like the new decks or like breakout decks of the this weekend, and stuff like that. But um, well, I noticed this probably about like I want to say 2 or 3 weekends ago. We got to where it was always like Demir and Gogari, and like Gogari was always putting up less numbers as a whole, like the top 32s and things like that. But it'd be like 56 to 32. It was close. We were close. Demir was putting up more numbers, but and then the next deck would be like 20. Like so, Demir was always or Gogari was always like neck and neck, and then one day it was Demir, Gogari just like fell off the face of the earth. And I
Hmm.
don't know if people just woke up and realized that Golgari was not as good as it used to be. I think the biggest thing people are learning is that the Chalice, or what is it, the Annex Chalice, the
Yeah, yeah.
door, whatever the door
The
is,
door.
uh, is not a good card. Like the card was really good, and then we got a lot more of these bounce strategies and like more tempo version strategies going on. And when you can just bounce your demon to where you're never going to be gaining life, it's no longer good. Like you're just now losing 2 life a turn. Yeah, you're drawing a card, but it doesn't matter. I'm out tempoing you. I'm drawing more cards and playing more spells. I have a higher velocity of going through my deck than you do, and you're guaranteed an extra card every turn.
Randy, it's almost even worse because imagine spending 3 mana on Unholy Annex to like put it into play. You go to pass the turn, and before you even get the trigger, it's getting bounced back to your hand. You literally spent 3 mana to do nothing. I mean, same thing with like Glissa and whatever, but this is just straight up like 3 mana. I did nothing on my turn, and my opponent's untapping with just a bunch of bullshit on like the other side of the table. So like Golgori, you're right. I think with the plethora of strategy, these Esper Pixie decks, the Demir enchantments decks, like the terrors, all this
Yeah.
stuff is just super bad and super hostile to Golgori in a way that maybe people wouldn't have necessarily expected it to be for that deck.
No, and so I was really surprised to see it have so many copies registered. The next one is Domain Control, which had 86 copies at 6%. I'm surprised by this, but not for the same reason as Zur is a really good card when
Mm-hmm.
you're reanimating, or it's not reanimating, but like animating your um overlords ahead of time. Like just being able to go turn three, like domains like Nut Draw is like turn two beans, turn three, green overlord, turn four, Zur activate Zur.
Mm-hmm.
And like most decks can't really come back from that because you need 2 removal spells that turn. Like you have to kill Zur because he gives your enchantments hexproof for some ungodly reason, along with like lifelink and death touch or something. Let's like, what if we just give Domain everything? Let's just give him everything.
Yeah, you
And
you play Zur, it just gives your enchantments Atraxa.
yeah, it's
Might
it's
as well.
awful. Um, but so you have I do think Domain is like in this weird position where it's not terrible against the bounce stacks because it has so much value to keep up with them, and like all their permanents are going to be bouncing. have abilities coming in with them. So like, bouncing the White Overlord doesn't do anything when it's making 2/1/1 or two ones coming into play with it, or bouncing the Green Overlord still mana ramp them to where they can just now hardcast the next turn, or bouncing. I know some of them are on the red version. You never want to bounce the Red Overlord. Hey, I
Mhm.
know this is a free kill spell to deal 4 damage to anything. Do you want to have that back in your hand? Like, unless you're killing them because you're doing that, it's just terrible. So
Mhm.
like Domain is like definitely a better position because of that, and then like because of Xur, like they have the edge now against, or not the edge, but they can beat the mono red decks or the red aggressive decks now. Um, it's definitely like night and day difference with Domain. Like if you see Xur, you're beating mono red. If you don't see Xur, you're probably losing against mono red type situation. It's not
Mhm.
that cut and dry, but it's almost that cut and dry.
Well,
Um,
in kind of the anti metagame pick, or I guess whatever you want to call it, when people are kind of like focusing in on like the mice package a lot for a lot of their aggro strategies, Leyline Binding is just great against it because even in that scenario, even if they destroy it, they're getting just a 1/1 back. And you've
yeah,
gotten so much tempo from getting rid of it anyway that it's going to be in your favor. Plus, that's a future 6/6 lifelink, death touch, indestructible, poison 6, like whatever else that like Zerg ends up giving that enchantment anyway. So,
yeah.
Domain, I haven't given it a lot of respect. I still don't respect the Domain players. I think they're filthy animals. I would just say that they are subhuman, but I think that's still even being too nice to them. But it is a pretty good pick, I would say, for the current standard metagame, and just the fact that it beats those mid-range decks by just being able to go a lot bigger than those mid-range decks.
Yeah. It has game kind of against everything in the meta. Obviously, it still loses to the like the super aggressive starts. Like you can still just like lose to that. I beat Domain as like one of the like Sultai bounce decks. Essentially, I just like being super aggressive. So I knew I was playing against a Domain player. I mulliganed down to like 5 or 6 cards and keeping two of the honor makers
Oh,
the talent. I
oh
can't think of the
yeah,
name.
of course can't think of the
Oh, Storm,
talent. It's
Storm
literally
Chaser's talent.
Pioneer. Yeah, Storm
Yeah,
Chaser's talent.
Storm Chaser's talent, and like you can just beat them down. Like I had my opponent down to like 5 life before they were able to answer my talents. Like you can just super aggressively attack them essentially, and then it's hard for them to come back from that. Again, though, like one Xur definitely would have changed that math for them very easily. So like. It is the deck is definitely live or die by Xur, but they do have enough kind of like mid-range grind to outdo that, and then they can just go over top of anything that any of the other decks are doing.
Yeah.
Probably the only other grindier deck than them is the mono white tokens or caretaker's talent, as I call it.
Mm.
I refuse to call it mono white tokens. It's so long. It's just caretaker's talent. The whole deck is built around caretaker's talent and carrot cake.
Yeah.
That's your deck. Then fill in the other white cards.
Yeah, true. Like throw in some number of like split up Sunfalls and Bezas, and like the deck just builds itself.
Yeah, and then so 76 players registered that for 5% of the meta. Um, I did say last weekend I thought this was a super well positioned deck to take going into this tournament. They've been playing 4 of the White Overlords recently to go up against the Jameer mid range. It gives you answers against their flyers. It makes them having Kaido stay alive a lot harder. Because of that, you now have flying creatures to pressure their flying creatures, things like that. I said the deck is really well positioned. It's good against the aggro game, it's good against the mid range game. It loses the combo decks, right? It loses like the Flood Caller combo a lot or like the Sultai Beans, Sultai Tempo deck. It has a bad matchup against just because you have flash creatures and like you're pressuring so fast. Like when you're putting on a turn 2, turn 3 terror, that's so much harder for them to interact with than like anything else going on. And you have the bout spells to like keep their tokens off the board. So I thought that Mono White was like a very well positioned deck, and apparently enough people thought so as well because it was the fifth most played deck. So
And
I
potentially just
feel
yeah, go ahead.
I feel validated and like I was right about this.
Of note to like add to that point, Mono White was also the 10 like there was a 10-0 player, undefeated on day one, went in, played against another deck that we'll be going over here very I guess shortly ish, to go 10-0 in the tournament. We'll find out how well that ended up going for them, but usually when you start 10-0 in a tournament, I would say things go very well for you. some would say.
Yeah, so I mean, it definitely was, I think, a correct choice. I think I made the joke that the hardest thing about playing mono white is not getting draws,
Hmm.
and it's a lot of it is your opponent's not conceding. If that makes it sound like weird, people don't understand when they're just dead against mono white. Like mono white will eventually get to a point where they usually have like 4 or 5 cards in hand, a board state, a caretaker's talent going, and their opponent will still keep playing. And the mono white player will not be at 1 life. They'll be at like 15. And they're like, I can win this. It's like you cannot win this game. Maybe if you're domain, you can win this game, but like it's usually not the domain players that are doing this. It's like the Golgari mid-range deck. Like I can outgrind them. You can't outgrind them. You've already lost this game. Just concede.
Yeah.
Like people need to learn when to concede. Like I know pro players talk about, don't concede early, but like there is times where you need to look at the clock and go, I need to concede if I'm going to win 2 more games.
Yeah, but you remember this is like a Dormammu with Doctor Strange. It's like I'm not locked in here with you, you're locked in here with me kind of thing. I've
Yeah,
come to bargain, and my bargaining chip is that we only have 20 minutes left on clock, and I am up a game, and I need you
yeah,
to figure out a way how you're going to close out this game.
yeah. Because mono white will mono. I will wager a bet that the 10-0 mono white player has a lot of records that were 1-0.
I wish. Actually, we actually probably could do it. I'm not gonna do it now because it's gonna mess up this cool thing I have where I have these graphics overlaid over our faces. But we'll have to check it afterwards.
Yep. And then Esper Pixie, which was the new Esper like self bounce deck, is what MG or MTG Goldfish calls it. I just been calling like Esper Bounce. It's the new hotness that was broke out the weekend before this tournament, which a lot of people probably would have wished it broke out the weekend of this tournament because then it would be a lot more new and less people would have been prepared for it. I still think that people weren't super prepared for it. The deck isn't super complicated to beat, but it definitely destroys Demir's gameplay when you have a whole bunch of flyers and Demir's whole stick is I have flyers that are unblockable and I put Kaido in and I'm so good. Um, so this deck definitely preyed on the fact that Dimir doesn't have a good game plan against it because you're playing a bunch of value creatures that, self-bounce your stuff to give you more value. So even if you're like, killing their creatures in response or doing it, you're still getting extra value from this. You're still, causing them issues and troubles, and then all your flyers stop their flyers so they can't get an easy Kaido down type situation. Um, 73 people registered it, only 5%. I thought this would be a lot higher. It might have been that the deck was still too new for people to truly grasp or get a hold of, or they just didn't get the cards in time, something like that. Um, it wasn't playing anything too high valued, like to try to get a hold of, so it wasn't like it was a hard card to get a hold of besides Stormchaser's Talent. But that card's kind of started to be a pain to get a hold of anyway. I think they're up to probably like $15 now a piece because that card just is seeing play in every deck now.
Hmm.
But so nothing too surprising there. And then we had Mono Red Aggro with 66% or 66 players playing, not 66%. 66 players playing it, 5% of the metagame as well. Um, at this point, I don't actually understand the reason to be Mono Red. I don't understand why you just don't splash Speak Rule and get some better sideboard cards, better main deck cards. I'm not sure what I'm missing. I'm really not. I haven't figured out why people are so adamant to still play mono red. I think it's wrong. But, obviously 5% of the players thought that it was the correct choice and took it. And then we had Jeskai Convoke at 56 players took it, 4% of the meta. I think this is a really good deck. It does well against the two mid-range decks, Dimir and Rule Agra, or Dimir and Golgari. So, like, you have good game plans against them. You go super wide, which those decks aren't prepared for usually in the main deck. You can beat the Gruul aggro deck because you guys go super wide and then you just go big and you kill them before they can usually kill you, as barring nut draws and things of that nature. Um, you have good game plan against the tempo decks that are running around. You can go wider than them and then go over them. You have good game plan against pretty much everything besides like domain and mono white tokens or caretaker's talent. You kind of lose to them because they have the board wipes, they have the things that can answer you early. Now, obviously, you can still go, faster than them, bigger than them, things like that. Those are like your two biggest matchup or worst matchups. So if you think that that's not going to be a popular deck, that's definitely where you want to be at. I think that realistically, that's where you want to be at, probably for any of your RCQs and stuff. If you're looking for like a cheap interactive deck that does well, definitely a good deck to take. I know Dakota did a video on this. I think came out today.
Yeah, as we're
So
recording this,
yeah,
probably as this is getting uploaded, it would have been yesterday.
yeah. So it came out like yesterday. If you're really interested about that deck, you did a good job of explaining, your matchups, what you're doing with the deck, why you should take it. But it's definitely a really well positioned deck. This is probably one of the other things that super surprised me. Azorius Oculus had 44 players register at 3%. Really surprised to see that. That deck has like literally fallen off the face of the earth until this past weekend. No one was playing it. When I was doing metagame breakdowns, it would be like I go through like probably 5 or 6 challenges. We would put like 3 copies in the top 32 altogether. Like it died.
Womp.
Uh, the deck died hard. I have some things to talk about that probably after we get more into like day 2 and stuff about why I think the deck has actually gotten more better positioned. Um,
Mm.
and then we had Teamer Otters with 32 players at 2%. That's the Rug Flood Collar combo. Um, not much to say about this deck. It's good at comboing. It eats all the slow controlling decks, so it eats Golgari, it eats Domain, it eats Mono Light tokens pretty easily. It loses the super aggressive decks, which is why I got off this deck pretty early on. Gruul aggro just eats you alive, and so does Mono Red aggro and Boros aggro. Like you're at best, I could get those matchups to a 50%, and I just don't think that's good. And mind you, that's 50% after sideboard. Game 1, you're like 20%. You're like, did your opponent not mulligan to no lands or no cards in hand? You're probably not winning this game. It's atrocious. It's awful. I hate it. I hate it so much because I love that deck. And then followed by that, we had 12 people registering the Sultai Beans or Bug Beans is like the bug tempo deck that's running around. So any Merc Crab, Tolarian Terror, Bounce Spells, things like that. Um, was 2%, and then someone messed this up.
Mm.
Azorius Aggro had 25 players at 2%. So he went from
Yep.
12 to 25.
Yep.
Yeah,
You
someone
double the amount
so
of decks. It's still 2%.
yeah, that's interesting. Someone definitely like messed up um this breakdown. This obviously wasn't made by us. This was, Star City made this, so you'll yell at them, not us. But Azorius Aggro, 25 people had that registered, 2%. That is the deck that Doomwake kind of like put on the map. It was playing the Leyline Axe, Bunnycorn, uh,
Mm.
all the good white and blue convoke cards, but no convoke cards in the deck. Uh, if you look on MTG Goldfish, they'll often call it Azorius Convoke for some reason. No
Yeah.
convoke cards in the 75 ever.
But don't worry, Jeskai gets called Jeskai aggro, even though it has
Nope,
an
nope.
actual convoke card
They
in it.
finally changed that this last weekend. They
Oh, thank
finally changed
God.
it to Jeskai Convoke. It was the biggest pet peeve of mine because like I go through and like get all this information, break it down, and try to get it into a suitable format for people to like digest and talk over it. And every time I had to change it from Jeskai Aggro to Jeskai Convoke. Meanwhile, I had to change Azorius Convoke to Azorius Aggro because there's no Convoke cards in Azorius Convoke, and it's just like that's not what this deck is. Words mean nothing anymore. Um, uh, and then we had Selesnya Tokens, which is just like the Selesnya Cage deck. Again, a deck that Doomwake was kind of championing. I put up a couple videos about it and did talk about it a lot. I don't know if there's any other streamers that were talking about it. I just know Doomwake made a big splash with it before this tournament, talking about it and saying how good it was. 2% of the meta was that. Um, Boros Mice and then Boros Aggro was 23 and 21 at 2% and 1%. Um, I don't know the difference between Boros Aggro and Boros Mice. I've seen the list multiple times. It's the same thing as you'll see a Gruul Aggro and a Gruul Prowess. Seen the list. They're like the exact same list every time. I don't know what changes between the two to make them different decks. Boros Mice could be playing the 3-drop mice. That is sometimes what they play. But a lot of times Boros Mice and Boros Aggro are almost like identical because they're just playing a mouse package. And sometimes Boros Mice will play a 3-drop mouse as a one of compared to Boros Aggro not playing that. There is some differences with Boros Aggro. If they're super heavy on a different plan, you'll see them on like more burn strategy and playing Slick Shot Show Off as a card instead of like some of the mice in the mice package. But it's not all the time either. It's really hit or miss. Like I think names don't mean anything in Magic at this point when it comes to these aggro decks. You can almost call them whatever you want to, and you pretty much know like 50 of the 75 cards almost every time, not counting lands.
Look, I grew up in an era where we tried to mask like red black mid range and red black aggro, and the difference was like red black mid range played one more 4 mana Chandra than the aggro deck, which
Yeah.
makes absolutely no sense. But um, yeah, it's I think a lot of the time we talked about in the last episode too that a lot of like the Boros aggro decks could probably just get lumped together just because they're not really like that. Even though they're I guess inherently doing different things, you can kind of like put them together. Same thing with like the Gruul variants, like you could probably put them together, but I think Gruul aggro now is too on right now to be contained to having to share space with Gruul prowess. So I guess prowess just gets its own thing now because it's broke, it's been kicked out of the house, like you haven't been paying rent, sorry bud.
Except the fact that it's still like 74 of the 75 same cards.
Yeah, I mean, like it don't matter. I have a funny story that I'll tell you after this, and you'll have to remind me, and you're gonna have to try very hard to remind me because it's gonna be like an hour and a half later, and I'm gonna be like, oh, what was that story? Um, but yeah, that's the day one metagame. A few things that I have, I think Esper Pixie kind of honestly probably proved that it's here to stay. I think that it was a deck that performed very well. I think it's kind of in this weird realm where I would consider it a mid-range deck. But like the grind is definitely a lot different. Where, again, what I really liked about Demir is that you play out all your things, and then Enduring Curiosity just like gets you back to that point where it's like, oh, we're restarting the game, but you have 2 cards. I have 7 cards. I have a board. You don't really have a board. So that's where Demir mid range is, and Esper Pixie is definitely like this tempo-y kind of like I'm gonna bounce my things, I'm gonna get value over and over and over again, and even though I'm not drawing, 5, 10 extra cards over the course of a game, I'm drawing those cards by getting to replay either my kill spell in Nowhere to Run. I'm making tokens if I'm playing Storm Chaser's talent. Also potentially getting to loop this town ain't big enough to get even additional value. There's some that were playing the Cadaver's Lab stuff where they could essentially pick up their bounce creatures and then make a 2/2 and then just bounce that back and just keep the loop going, which I think is the thing that kind of held this deck back is what is the correct flex slots of things that we can kind of bounce and get the most value out of. I think is also a reason that might have held this deck back, where we've seen people branch out into different versions of this deck where maybe they don't play white or they don't play black or anything like that. They just end up being kind of 2-color, and I think that's going to be the interesting metamorphosis of this deck. And I would say the surprising, not so surprising thing for me with this deck is the fact that not many people played it in comparison to some of the other decks, but I also think it was probably one of the best decks to take for the weekend if you ended up finding the right combination of cards to play with the core of the deck.
Yeah. So I will point out now, I'm just gonna call them this town ain't big enough decks. Essentially these tempo bounce decks. We had Rug starting us off. We had the Flood Color combo deck using it. Then we pivoted to the Sultai build, or sorry, the blue-green build that was playing, Terrors, Eddie Crabs. Then we pivoted to a Sultai build, a Bant build, 4-color build.
Mm-hmm.
We now have Esper build, and we have a Demir build.
Yes, sir.
This town ain't big enough is holding together about 7 different decks, and it is quite insane that it was like this uncommon. I think it is.
Yep.
Uncommon that so many people overlooked, myself included. I looked at that set more than I have most sets because I was playing some um limited RCQs
limited
at that time.
Yeah.
So I had to care about that set more than I've had to care about most sets outside of like Modern Horizon sets, because all those uncommons and commons can still be broken. They can be just as good as the rares. That's not the case in standard ever.
Some would say.
Um, um, and it is wild that like it's not wild that I overlooked this. I am not, a proficient brewer. I don't make decks all the time. I'm not an aspiring spike type person. Fully okay with that. I recognize that. I think my gameplay comes better as a technical game player and understanding patterns a little bit to what I think I can understand, and kind of like picking a best deck in the meta that way.
Hmm.
Perfectly fine with myself being like that. I don't need to brew and make the newest hotness. But I think the fact that like this town ain't big enough is just such a linchpin card, and it's so innocuous. Like when you read that card, you don't go, "Oh, well, this is clearly a card that's going to hold 17 decks together."
Hmm.
Like that is not how you read this town ain't big enough. You read this town ain't big enough of like, well, I can see how this would be good if I had like cards I wanted to bounce back because it's a 2 mana bounce 2 spells back. And then like well maybe it would be good as like a combat trick in limited. Um Maybe I can find a use for this somewhere in standard. Maybe this is like a good one or two of something like that. And it's like, no, it's a four of and like 7 decks are all like well positioned in the meta. You're like, what? What?
Yeah.
It's just wild to me.
This town ain't big enough reminds me of a card from, I think it was originally printed in Eldraine, and it was Runaway Together. And I mean, it's a pretty good card. It's, I think you have to bounce one of your creatures, and you can bounce one of your opponent's creatures for 2 mana. I think it was a sorcery, and like that was like a fine card. So the fact that a lot of the time, as we see with later sets, we essentially get the same card, but it's printed and it's either as an instant or has flash, and then it also draws you a card. And this town ain't big enough. The fact that you change the words, you don't have creature on there, it's just a non-land permanent, and you have the option to, hey, this will cost 2 mana if you target one of your things. And the fact that we still have up the beanstalk and standard means that not only are you getting you're getting a good amount of tempo by bouncing one of your opponent's like 3-4 mana plays, completely time walking them, while also getting to pick up like your Storm Chaser's talent, or in the case of some of these other like Esper decks, like the whatever dumb like 1 mana enchantment that makes your opponent discard a card and lose 2 life.
Mhm.
You're getting value, like you're getting additional value from it that is going to end up creating more value on. And then if you have a beanstalk, drawing a card while getting a lot of tempo. But then there's also the times too where you just get to pick up 2 of your own things, or you can just spend 5 mana and bounce 2 of your opponent's things on the end of their turn. There's like, that's the worst mode on the card, and even then for the decks playing it, that's still really good.
So I've been playing a lot of like essentially Sultai, um, the Sultai Terror deck. And the fact that like the deck is just so like this town ain't big enough. There is no card I can replace that card with. It does so much work. The fact that like Beanstalk was ever printed is just a mistake. Like it just oh god, it just feels so good. And like you can just out tempo your opponent with this town ain't big enough is so well. Like there's just the fact that you can just hold up like 2 to 4 mana and your opponent has to play around essentially like 7 cards is
Mm-hmm.
insane. And it's just like it's amazing what you can do, especially like just with when you're playing like Eddie Bart Crab too. Like you can just out tempo your opponent so well. Where you're just like they go to move to combat. Like, all right, when you go to move to combat, I'm going to go ahead and like I'm gonna play this town big enough. I'm gonna bounce one of your creatures. I'm gonna bounce my Eddie Bart Crab. Usually I'm triggering beans at this late like in this stage of the game. I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna recast Eddie Bart Crab. I'm gonna tap down of your other creatures. So now my Eddie Bart Crab is gonna get to attack for free next turn. I'm gonna trigger beans again. And you're just like your opponent's just like for 4 mana you just decimated my board to a point that like I have to take a hit of 5 pretty much, and I'm just like not in a position to win. And you drew 2 cards, you replaced the cards you played, and then you got to draw another card on top of it,
Mm-hmm.
and you're just like it's I don't know, it's just it's one of those cards that like I think probably 90 out of 100 Magic players overlook this town ain't big enough, and all it took was one person to look at this card and go, "Hey, we should play this," and then it's exploded from there. And this is kind of what I like about Magic is like Magic is too much of a complex game for any one person to sit down and build the best deck. And like when you just get all these Magic players to converge and understand like this card's better than we thought it was, and then just like see everybody pile on and go, okay, well we can do this, and it's like, yeah, but you guys didn't think about this color combination that we can also do. And it's crazy what we see. Magic players being able to do, and what like because essentially Esper bounce was like not thought of, right? Like we saw this the iterations we went through, and like no one thought to not play this talent big enough along with Beanstalk. Like why would you do that? Why would you not get free value? And someone's like, yeah, but we could do it even differently, even more different, and still be getting value because we're bouncing a spell that makes our opponent discard a card now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just it's interesting to me. It's interesting to see how the metagame is evolving and what we're seeing essentially.
Yeah, for sure. The weird that the best solution for a meta that is very heavy on mid range, and followed up the mid range, following up behind the mid range decks are these aggro decks. Is what if we just played, these efficient bounce spells, and then we also played permanents that normally are just like okay cards, like when you get to do them once, but are insane and pretty overbearing if you get to do them multiple times. And I think the Esper Pixie deck just kind of caught fire. I don't know how good this deck gets. I think it can only get so big in my conspiracy theory brain for the fact that bouncing their things kind of sucks, because like they're wanting to do the thing that you're wanting to do. So I don't know how awkward it is where if you just try to like max value on all of your stuff, that's probably how it ends up going. But it's going to be interesting to see, because I think that deck is going to kind of keep climbing up the ladder. And unfortunately, I think we're still going to see Dimir mid-range near the top, but this enchantment deck absolutely catching fire right at the perfect time.
So I have a hot take. I think that the new iteration of Dimir midrange is going to be Dimir bounce. I think that's going to be the better version of Dimir moving
It
forward,
might
and
be.
we'll talk about that more here in a second. But that is kind of a super hot take I had after kind of seeing the results of the tournament and things of that nature. Um, I kind of saw that and I was like, I think this might be like I think that was probably the breakout deck of the weekend, along with the one other deck.
And how well did these decks do? Well, the important thing is going to be obviously translating how many people registered this deck in day one, not necessarily looking at the percentage, but looking at how many people registered a certain deck in day one and seeing how many ended up translating to day two. And while, obviously we could expect that the decks that had a lot of people register for it are going to have a lot of people, that's going to be the important thing, is like essentially who what's the word I'm looking for? Who took care of business, beat the people that they're supposed to beat, like Dimir and Grill Aggro. They have a lot of people. They should put a lot of people in. But, when you start getting lower down this list, all right, like who ended up overperforming? Like we have 73 Pixie players. We have 66 Mono Red Aggro players. Did 50 of them get to day two, or did 2 of them get to day two? And that's where I think is a lot more valuable than, here's their
Yeah,
percentage on day one, here's their
the
percentage on day two.
the conversion rate, right? So like
Yep.
if we had 210 Dimir mid-range players, 14% of the meta. Now obviously if only 50 of those guys convert, that's not a good showing. That means 150 players got knocked out of day two.
Yep.
So obviously still a lot of people converted, but that was going to happen, right? You had a high starting number. Unless all of them don't convert, you're going to have a high secondary number, right?
Yep.
And so I think going into that, I guess we'll just I don't know if you want me to go over day two. You want to go over day two? I don't care.
Yeah, I'm gonna pull up day two here real quick, and then I'll kind of quickly go over them, and we can kind of talk about some surprising things as I do my dual screen action. As
Oh, Mr. Moneybags over there.
ooh, fancy pants. All right, so I have them both up side by side because this is gonna work out
Yep.
perfectly. So we have on the right, you have the day two metagame. We have Dimir midrange 62 decks. From 210. About I
Oh,
guess
hang
better
on.
than like 25-30% somewhere in
It
there.
is. It was a 29.5% conversion rate.
Yeah, like about okay, so about 30% of the Demir mid-range players ended up making it into day two. I would say that's pretty good, granted, given how many people registered the deck and of course how many people were at this event. Gruul Aggro, 5 less players registered versus Demir mid-range for day one, and 1 less deck going into day two. So, if we're pretty happy with how Demir mid-range went from day one to day two, then we have to be equally, if not maybe just a little bit more happier for aggro.
So 29.75% converted for that. I'm going to give you the real updates as we go through
Okay.
this if you're good with
So
that.
like Yeah, that's perfect. So just slightly better than Demir mid range. So I mean, I would still say about 30% of those players converting when they were that much of the meta game on day one, I would say is pretty good. Next, we have Esper Pixie, which put 35 players into day two. It was 10% of the day two metagame, but then when we look and see that, hey, 73 people register the deck, Randy, lay it on me.
Yeah, so 49 or 47.9%. So basically 48% converted, almost a 50% conversion rate, which is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, we started off with a small enough number already where we only had 73 people. So like having a basically 50% conversion rate is wild, right? Because like we put up, 30 less player, 25 less players than Demir,
Mm-hmm.
but we had a significant less people registering this deck.
Yeah.
We had 73 compared to 210. So wild conversion rate for that one.
Yeah, that would put like Esper Pixie if they had as many people, if as many people registered Esper Pixie as they did Demir, that would be probably near like 100 players, like 90 or 100 players converting from day one to day two, which is
Yeah.
an absolute like that's like a number that's I think pretty hard to fathom. But it's like if you put Esper Pixie in their situation, they end up getting 30 more players into day two, which is just nuts.
Yeah.
Moving on, the next best performing deck in day one would be Domain Control, where we had, as I find it real quick, 86 players playing at day one, 28 making it to day two.
So a 32.5% conversion rate, still better than both Demir and Gruul Aggro.
Mm-hmm. I would still say pretty good, and of course, I think getting a good draw with Gruul Aggro and probably Esper Pixie as well, or I guess probably just Gruul and Demir. Really, who knows how the Pixie matchup is? I don't think anybody knows how it is for anything. Then we have Randy's kind of like dark horse pick, just a really good deck to take to the format. Mono white tokens. We had it at, of course. Why don't they just match up? Mono white tokens, 76 total decks in day one, with 16 getting into day two.
With a 21% conversion rate. So our first deck to do worse than our top decks of Demir and Gruul, because they were doing like 29% essentially. So did worse, but still having a 21% conversion rate is not anything to be sad about, especially when you consider how low the numbers were, right? It wasn't like they were putting up 400 people in this tournament. It was, 76 players.
And mono red. What mono red 66 going to 16 players making it to day two.
Yep. So 24.24%.
All right, like
Kind of funny.
it's like okay, like that's fine.
A quarter of them still basically made it in, which is good for what I still think that if you're registering mono red, you're just doing it wrong. You should be registering Gruul. Like you only get advantages, and your deck is basically all mono red already in the Gruul deck. Like it's not like the mana's not worse. You're still doing well. That's my little rant though.
Moving on. Moving on. We have the next one. I bring this up a little bit more. Probably the big fall off that we've been alluding to. Golgari midrange, 124 decks in day one, with only 16 of those players converting into day two.
12.9%.
That is dog shit.
So that is horrendous conversion rate, which is kind of what we've been talking about. Is Golgari is kind of fallen off because I think again all these bounce decks are just eating it alive. Um, this is my personal antidote. I played in a couple RCs or RCQs, not RCs. I played in a couple RCs as well, but RCQs for standard. um, and I'm playing the Salt High Tempo deck. When I play against Golgari, I just count it as a buy. It's just like the games I lose is because I kept like a one land hand and didn't ever find a second land. Like it is just it's almost guaranteed to buy. It is just that in that much in my favor, I feel. Now it could be I'm playing against bad players. I'm getting unnormally lucky. There could be a bunch of different factors. I'm not saying that this is for sure guaranteed. I'm just saying that this is what it feels like for me when I sit down against Golgari. I was like, oh, cool. I'm already 1-0, or I'm already 2-0, 3-0, whatever round we're on. I just count it as I've already won. Obviously, I can lose that matchup. It's not 100% to 0% type situation, but it just feels so good.
Yeah, it's probably the matchup that you're looking for, playing the Sultai Terror or just any of like the Terror style decks. Um, shoot, all right, I almost lost myself, but we
Yeah.
found the plot again. We have Azorius Oculus, which I could do this one. 44 players day one, 11 making into day two, 25% conversion rate. Nice, clean, and easy.
Which is still really good though when you consider, only 44 players registered that. That's a good conversion rate. You're not sad.
Oh yeah, and even better too, the Selesnya tokens deck, 23 decks, 12 making it in. Um, Real quick moffs. That's better than 50%.
Yeah, it's 52.
52%. Yeah, I wasn't
That's
gonna
yeah. I
get
was doing
50%.
Jeskai Convoke because I completely I skipped Jeskai tokens, which
I
is just
mean,
like or Selesnya tokens, which is just the Selesnya Cage deck for you people at home
yeah.
if you're curious,
For
because it will
those of
get
you.
put as Selesnya Cage like in 95% of the other places, but for some reason Star City Games. Magic especially like on like when Magic actually does like Pro Tours and stuff, they have some weird names that they call things. They're like everyone's like, yeah, that's Selesnya Cage. They're like Selesnya Aggro. Nope.
Hmm.
Just call it what the community's already called it. Like, stop it.
Rage in the cage.
Uh,
Convoke, as you were saying, just got Convoke had 56 decks into day one, only 9 converting into day two.
so only a 16% conversion rate. I want to say that these, I want to say the Convoke players probably played against the decks they didn't want to play against in round one, round two, the Domain and the Mono White decks. I think that's where they really lose their bread and butter. It's like that's the decks they don't want to face into. You're just like, awesome. Playing against a deck that plays 8 board wipes.
Oh yeah,
What's my game plan again? Making a bunch of tokens and then swinging the turn after I make them. Awesome, let's go. That's not fodder at all.
I know. Jim Davis and Ross Merriam both made day two with this deck. So I mean, two really really good players that said that this was going to be a good deck to take for the tournament. And I mean, they both ended up finishing like 9-6, which is a very far cry from making the top eight and doing anything. But nonetheless, I would say very very disappointing conversion rate when you have two really good players that played the deck and they still only managed 9-6. Maybe Jeskai is a little bit less favorable in the metagame than I think, but that's it's neither here nor there. The deck's so explosive that it's probably always going to have a home in standard.
I will say your decks live and die by how good of an explosive start you have, in the sense of like not so much that like you need like the magical Christmas land hands, but when you just have like a good like when you keep a 2 land hand and all spells, and you're just like on your fourth turn hitting your third land, you're just winning 90% of those games because you're just putting so much pressure and so fast usually,
Yeah, I
as
mean,
compared to where if you have to mulligan to 5, you're like, all right, I keep a 3 land hand, 2 spells, and your opponent's like, kill spell. Awesome, man. What's that? Fourth land in a row? Awesome. Glad I played this game.
yeah, I mean, even there's a few times like in the only standard RCQ that I've currently got to play so far. There was at least a few times where I mulliganed to 5, and I lost one of them, but I know of 2 instances for a fact where I mulliganed to 5, and I ended up just like absolutely destroying my opponent. Where I think a lot of the time you're really happy if your opponent mulligans to 5. You're like, yes, this should be an easy game. As long as I get past their plan A, like plan B should just be to I guess run out the clock and hope that I won game one. But this deck definitely does have that comeback pedal where it's like even on a 5 card hand, if you're not interacting at the right points, we're hitting the gas and we're just going, and you're gonna be tasting dust
Yeah.
and a bunch of tiny fists.
Yeah.
Um, Going on, I'll go
Uh,
over like a few more of these.
I want to talk about the Saltai
Yeah, go
Beanstalk
ahead.
list because that's what I'm playing. So like, it did only have 12 copies on day one,
Mm-hmm.
but 7 made it into day two. That's a 58% conversion rate.
Which again, very good. We can be pretty happy about that.
Yeah, that is wild to think about, and it was such a small subset of players that made it in. It's very impressive to me. The other one I want to talk about is the Teamer Otters, or like the Rug Floodcaller deck, just because
Mm-hmm.
we had 32 players in day one, a total of 4 converted into it. And this is kind of what I was talking about, like where it's just not it's not a good deck into the aggro deck. And when we have the second most played deck being Gruul aggro, that's not a position you want to put yourself into. I'm not saying the deck is bad. I'm not saying it's a bad deck. I'm just saying that it has a weakness, and its weakness is obvious. That's a 12.5% conversion rate for anybody who wanted to know. Just ridiculously terrible.
Bad.
Yeah.
And really, like the other aggro decks not faring a lot better. We have Boros Mice, Boros Aggro is like the last ones that we see on day 1. Day 2, only 4 copies for Boros Aggro, 5 for Boros Mice, which I would say is a pretty bad conversion rate.
Yeah, because I mean, that's 5 divided by 23. So what? Yeah, still a 21% conversion rate, I guess, but like, it's still just not where you want to be.
Yeah.
Like,
I guess percentage wise, fine. Eye test, it looks terrible.
Yeah. But it is also one of these things where, like, I think if you want to play aggro, Gruul aggro is where you want to be. I think it's just kind of we have established like the best aggro deck is Gruul aggro as it sits right now. Maybe there's a way that Boros can usurp it. I think Mono Red is going to continue to fall off. I think Mono Red might be the worst version to play. Boros is only bad because of the mana base. Somehow it has a worse mana base than Gruul, so that's kind of like what makes it in that regard. But we see decks are definitely doing better than we expected. Dimir and Gruul obviously we're going to probably be the first and second most played or most deck to convert just because they had so many copies going into day 1. It's just a numbers game. By numbers, they should have the highest conversion rate or highest number of decks to convert.
Yeah.
Not so much percentage wise though. That's why looking at the percentage is much more interesting because we see because I think Sultai Beanstalk is a perfect one. There's only 7 on day 2. Yeah, but we started with 12.
Mm-hmm.
That's ridiculous. Over half of the crew got in. Like if you go to a tournament with 12 friends and 7 of you day 2, that's ridiculously good. There are pro teams that go into tournaments that have 12 people and 7 of them don't day 2. Like
Yep.
that is a great conversion number. It just looks terrible from the eye test of like only 7. That's terrible. It's like 12 people played it. 7 made it to day 2. That's where you want to be. You want to be a deck that has a good percentage against a lot of decks, and that deck definitely does.
Yeah.
That's how I was able to win an RCQ.
Yeah, and the big thing is, the best way to kind of like understand Magic data is that if you have a lot, it's almost like flipping a coin. It feels like a lot of the time where you have a deck that is played by a lot of people. If your deck is played a lot, it's normally healthy for it to have like a 51 to 52%, maybe 53% win rate. The reason why Modern was pretty bad when we had Nadu and when we had Boros Energy is just because a lot of people were playing them, and then in the non-mirror matches they were just always winning. They were up towards like 60%, which is not good. Even though if you won like 60% of your matches in like any other game, you would just be kind of like whatever, you'd be like a really good, but you wouldn't be like insane. And in Magic, it's absolutely nuts when someone gets to that point. So the fact that Dimir midrange, Gruul aggro, I would say took care of business. They had a lot of people play them. They had a lot of people get in. They were still the 2 most played decks going into day 2. So again, took care of business as they should have. But there was definitely some other decks that were just like, well, hold on here. Like we didn't have nearly the volume in terms of numbers that you guys had, but our conversion rates were absolutely sick. And I think that definitely gives us a clue as to, what decks are going to perform well against, the top dogs of the format. And I think very clearly, I think Esper Pixie is a really good pick. I think the Sultai Beanstalk deck, green, blue, ban, whatever you end up playing, I think both of those ended up being very good as kind of a takeaway for me. Absolutely avoid Gogori midrange like the plague. I don't care if Rock has him and his millions. They're just not good anymore. They're old.
God, that's a bad reference.
Sorry, can you smell what the Rock is cooking? It's called Last Place. That's what the Rock is cooking. You get the shiny turd trophy. for playing Gogori. Congratulations. You are not a contrarian. You are an absolutely person that is stuck in their ways, and you're just remember the days of Hermit Druid and whatever, just making a bunch of squirrels. It ain't happening anymore, Jim. Let it go.
You
Now
don't
that
need to
I've
treat them.
eviscerated 2% of the audience,
You don't need to treat them like Tron players, man.
the millions and the millions, it doesn't matter.
Jesus. But that is the decks that did what they converted into, what the percentage was for day two, what they converted percentage worked out to be. Like I said, there was definitely some decks that did really well in the conversion rate compared to, the numbers that they're putting up. And honestly, I'm really still surprised that Oculus did so well going into day two with a 25% conversion rate. That deck has fallen off the face of the earth. Like
Mm-hmm.
before this weekend, I couldn't tell you the last time I actually talked about Azorius Oculus existing. Um, but I have more theories on why that deck is actually really well positioned right now.
You want to go check out the bracket?
Yeah, the top eight bracket.
Yeah, because we got there's a top 8 for this event. There's people that are still playing for some pretty big prizes here. And we're just going to bring up the full bracket. This is like everything. It's going to show semifinals, finals, and how everything actually shook out. So, boo
Spoiler
me.
alert.
Spoilers. Spoilers ahead. If you have not watched the multiple streams that you would have seen on day one because of all the technical difficulties, and then the day two stream, stop right now. Finish watching it. But we're going to be bringing it up here right now. Oh, where'd it go? Oh, because I misclicked. Whoopsies. There we go.
Technical
Moto
difficulty.
fingers. Hang in there, Dakota. Meow.
The misclicks. So let's go over what the top eight was. I'm gonna go over it in order from 1 to 8, just so you know. If you're looking at this at home. So first place overall, going into the top eight was Nicholas with Gruul Aggro. No big surprise. We saw that being a super popular deck. Everyone figured at least one copy was going to be in the top eight. I'm no one's surprised by that. Number
Mm-hmm.
two is Dimir Enchantments. Now, if you want to remember back to 30 seconds ago when we talked about day one and day two, not even on the list. It was part of the other. That
Yep.
is how many people played this deck. It was able to not only day two, but also get into the top eight as a second overall seed, which is amazing. Going into third place, we had Eli with Azorius Oculus. Again, that deck has not been talked about for at least a month. That deck has fallen off the face of the earth. People thought it died. People only knew about Oculus because of Modern.
Oh,
Crazy that we were able to have a 25% conversion rate and make it into the top eight. Says a lot. Going on to the fourth place, I'm not going to pronounce that name. I apologize. I'm too white to pronounce that name.
Give it your
Uh,
best shot. Give it your best
Zhao.
unseasoned chicken
Yeah,
take.
Zhao. I'm guessing. If you watch this, I'm super appreciative you're watching this, and I apologize for butchering your name now. But they were playing Azorius Aggro. That was the blue white deck that was playing like Leyline Axe, Bunnycorn, things like that. All the good white and blue cards from Convoke, essentially, besides the actual Convoke creature.
Mm-hmm.
And then in fifth place, we had Gray playing Domain Control. Again, kind of surprising to see that into the top eight. It did have a decent conversion rate into day two, but still, this deck has kind of been, more towards the downswing. No one was really playing it a lot online. I don't know if this is people don't like it online, what the reasoning is for that, but just surprising enough. Ray
Yeah.
was playing Teamer Otters at 6. Again, deck had a terrible conversion rate going into day two. Only 4 people made it to day two, and one of those 4 people made it to the top 8. That's pretty impressive.
Pretty good.
Congratulations. Seventh was Victor with Gruul Aggro. So unfortunately, we did have 2 Gruul decks make it into the top 8. And then Steven in 8th place, also playing Gruul Aggro. So 3 Gruul Aggro decks into the top 8 because Gruul is probably one of the best decks to take in the format. I think that if you're looking to relatively easily take down an RCQ, Gruul is probably your best bet. It's a relatively cheap deck overall as well. So just keep that in mind. But so we had three Gruul aggro decks in the top eight. We had one Dimir Enchantment deck, one Azorius Oculus, one Azorius Aggro, one Domain, and then one Temur Otters.
And of note too, Nicholas Odenheimer's Gruul deck is not like the other Gruul decks because he was actually playing Leyline of Resonance in his main deck.
Yeah. Remember how people said that card was broken, and people said that card was Magical Christmas Land, and then that card got dropped? We've come full circle, baby. We're back in it.
Oh yeah, definitely channeling his Jean-Emmanuel Deprat, where he is just going to go, you know what? I'm going to be so explosive, and clearly it worked out. Of note too, because I just remembered this, and now I'm stalling, so I can actually fully remember what it was. Day one was closed deck list, with day two being open deck list, and of course the top eight as well being open deck list. So if that is something that matters to the other people, there's some decks that I think you can probably get the drop on people by playing it, but in a closed deck list environment versus open. So that is something that took place during this event. It was closed and then it became open once they posted the deck lists and the metagame breakdown and things like that.
Yes. So in the first playoffs, we had Gruul Aggro versus Gruul Aggro. Nicholas took it 2-1 against Gruul Aggro. Not too surprising. I do think that Nicholas's build was probably better for the Gruul Aggro mirror matches. You're just way more explosive than what the other deck is doing. And if there's a matchup you want to be more explosive in, it's definitely in the mirror matches, essentially. And then we had Azorius Aggro versus Domain. Domain took that in 2-1 as well. Not too surprising, the control deck versus the aggro deck. Especially because Azorius Aggro is not super fast aggressive, like we'll see from like how Nicholas is, where he can kill you on turn 2, turn 3. Azorius is definitely not killing you turn 2, turn 3. They are definitely playing a slower aggressive deck. They're still going to do a lot of damage to you, but that is where Domain definitely um, thrives. That's where
Yep.
thrives. I don't know why I was gonna say survive. Thrives though is in that like mid game where if they can get to 5 mana, they can play Azure, they can gain 6 life back type thing. They're gonna win that game. They're gonna be able to keep up with you, and they're gonna be dealing damage to you too. So you're having to chip away your board to be able to jump block and deal with that. Then we had Azorius Oculus versus Temur Otters. Temur Otters taking it 2-0. Not too surprising as a whole. Temur Otters kind of preys on these like mid-range decks. It is a combo deck that can kill you kind of out of nowhere, and it has a lot of moving pieces that you have to interact with and know when to interact with them. Azorius Oculus good against clogging up the board, putting on some board pressure, but not super fast. Your ideal is like your ideal is a turn 2 Oculus that you can technically do, but realistically it's turn 3, turn 4 is the earliest you're going to get like actual pressure on, and that gives Temur Otters enough time to kind of like start cycling through, getting a couple little draw spells going, a couple little board setups going, and just being able to like kind of get in a good position where they can just go, end of turn, Flood Caller, kill you on my upkeep type situation, or well, not on your upkeep, on your main phase, but same difference.
Mm-hmm.
So not too surprising to see Temur Otters kind of like just swiftly eat Oculus.
Yeah, raised
And
draws were also nuts in that quarterfinal match as well. Like
were
it
they?
just seemed really easy. Yeah.
I will say, when Temur Otters doesn't have to worry about their life total, their draws look a lot better because like they're not under the gun. Like when you're playing that deck and you're playing against a mid range deck and you're not like, all right, they have 13 power on turn 3. I gotta figure out how to win this turn. Fuck. Like you just look so much better
You're
because that's how it was when I was playtesting that deck. When I was playing against like mid range decks, like they didn't kill me fast enough to where I could set up like this kind of board state and like do something. And when playing against mono red, there's like, uh, I'm gonna go mouse on turn 1. Yep, I don't have a removal spell. Cool. I'm gonna go turn 2 into the 2-drop mouse that like then triggers my mouse to give it double strike, and now it has an extra counter on it, and you're taking 8, and it's like, oh cool. Cool. Top deck. Not a removal spell or a bounce spell. Awesome. What's that? You're gonna monstrous raise and kill me next turn? Cool. I'm glad I.
mm-hmm.
Why'd I sit down? Um, and then we had Dimir Enchantments versus Gruul Aggro, which the Dimir Enchantments took 2-0. I will say that is surprising to me because the first time we got to see this Dimir Enchantment deck, we saw what was his name? Oh, Gary Thompson.
Yep, Jerry.
Jerry. Yeah, I think I said Gary. Jerry Thompson. We saw him easily get defeated by Gruel Agro. I remember when I watched that matchup and I immediately texted you going, Dimir Enchantments look like it built a worse version of Dimir to play against aggro. I was like, I don't know what Gary was doing. Now, obviously, I must have been probably wrong because I'm sure Scott played against Gruel more than just in the top eight. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he just like lucked out and never had to play against aggro. Um, but clearly, if you take the mirror enchantments, you had a game plan. Obviously, when we saw it on camera, it just didn't look good in those early rounds. That's gonna happen. Like I said, it doesn't matter if you have a 90-10 matchup, you can still end up having that 10% and just drawing the wrong half of your deck, wrong cards at the wrong time, and getting smashed by a matchup that you should easily win. So, but I do remember just seeing Dimir Enchantments on camera like around five and going, what is he thinking?
Well, and I think too with the Dimir enchantments, because I think it leans probably a little bit heavier into the nowhere to run stuff. Your protection spells essentially get blanked by this like one card where, even if you do something and maybe it doesn't work the way that I think that it works, you're still able to just like bounce the nowhere to run and then play through the protection spell and still kill their creature because a lot of their stuff isn't going to have more than 3 toughness a lot of the time. So
Yeah.
definitely, I think I guess maybe it was just bad. Like I know when Jerry kind of cooks something up, he usually cooks pretty hard, and it's like Michelin 3-star meal. But yeah, it looked like he just pooped on a plate and served it to his opponent. Like just from how the game ended up turning out, like mulligan problems, things like that. But I definitely think that Dimir enchantments maybe as an alternative to the Esper deck. The Esper deck is pretty painful to yourself, but you obviously have more play. You have other things that you can do where Dimir can't do those things. So who knows what the difference ends up being, as we kind of move on from this metagame. But yeah, I mean, I guess I would expect the Dimir Enchantments deck to have a decent, at best, matchup against Gruul Aggro.
Yeah, I don't think it was nearly as bad as we saw in like what it was like round five, round six, whichever round it was. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it looked horrendous, and I was just like really surprised because I'm not like a super big like Jerry T fan.
Mm-hmm.
I've never have been. I don't think he's a terrible person or anything like that. I don't know, just something about him rubs me the wrong way. I can't quantify that into an actual opinion. Um,
It's because he's
but
good at Magic. Just say it.
listen,
he's
listen.
he's really good at this cardboard thing.
Um, but I still respect him as a Magic player and like know that he doesn't just register 60 islands, one racing goblin and go I'm gonna win.
Mm-hmm.
So I was very surprised to see like his deck just kind of like look non-existent in that gameplay, and I was just like, what are you doing? I was like, I thought maybe he cooked too hard to where he's just like sometimes you get too lost in the sauce and your testing reveals results that maybe are a little skewed. This happens to I want to say every player, every team that ever like puts together for Magic. You can definitely get a little lost in the sauce of what you're doing. I thought maybe that was what he did. Probably just had some bad draws. It happens to literally every Magic player. Um, so that's more likely what happened. Bad draws versus your opponent having good draws type situation. And especially with like Gruul aggro, it's really easy for them to look like they're doing everything and everything possibly they can. Like this, their like semi decent hands can just like look like all-star hands when they just like curve out perfectly and you stumble slightly. So it could have just easily been that case. But moving on to the semifinals, we had Gruul Aggro versus Domain. Nicholas took that 2-1. Looking at Nicholas's list too, it's not too surprising. Like I said, he was on the red ley line. Being able just to kind of like kill your opponent on turn two when Domain can't do anything until turn three usually, as far as like removal spells or anything you're looking pretty good if you're just like, hey, I'm gonna kill you on turn two. When can you interact? What's your earliest interaction? Turn two, maybe turn three for sure. Yeah, I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna go for it on turn two. I'm gonna see what happens.
I also think too, specifically this matchup, because I think he was playing uh, more protection spells than normal. I believe there was four Stake-Skin Veil to overprotect, and then of course turn inside out like in a pseudo way is a protection spell, especially if you have a ley line in play. So I would assume that the non nowhere to run deck has a little bit harder of a time, like when they're just like, oh, I'm gonna ley line binding to give myself some time, and it's like, no, you're not. I'm going to, you know, overprotect. I'm gonna get +3/+3 on top of having double strike. Oops, you're dead
Yeah.
for the full blowout. And two, it does give them indestructible. So really, Sunfall is like the answer that they're looking for, uh, just to play around the protection spells completely. And
Yeah.
that's 5 mana. We get to play 1/1/2 and then protect and pump spells and absolutely just ravage your life total. So you're probably right. Not really surprising that Domain struggled against the very aggressive and even more aggressive than normal aggro deck.
Honestly, I'm more surprised that Domain took a game.
I mean, I guess I could potentially see like on the play. I'd have to like rewatch the top eight because this is where I had to stop watching because your boy unfortunately works night shift, and being a day shift person is for the birds. Honestly, being a night gremlin is awesome.
Yeah, don't believe that kid's staying school. Um,
Whoa, hold on.
and then we had Temur Otters versus Dimir Enchantment. I need to go back and watch this matchup. I definitely didn't see this, and I'm kind of curious on how Temur Otters lost. Um, I feel like Temur Otters should have had a good matchup going in against Dimir Enchantment. Just based off of like Temur Otters can win kind of out of nowhere off of very few resources. So I would like to go back and watch that and see how that played out. See if Temur Otters had some bad draws or some bad flips with the Questing Druid, things like that, or Seek the Beast. If that was what happened, I'm just kind of curious. I'm like, where the ball got dropped, especially to lose, 0-2.
I
Um,
think I don't know because they probably played them all. I mean, they did play them all like side by side. I
mhm.
know that according to my wife anyway, that the Demir Enchantments Team Marauder deck was not even close. Like they went and tuned into it, and Ray was just getting absolutely pummeled by Scott. On the board. You know,
Interesting.
Uh, it was just
It will be
apparently not close.
That's interesting because I feel like it should be close. So I'm kind of curious if that was just bad draws. Maybe Jameer Enchantments is just like the super counter to Jameer Otters. I don't know. Obviously, I haven't played that matchup. I would argue that very few people have played that matchup, even you know a week after this event. That very few people had played has played that matchup.
And two, of note, like during coverage and everything, and I just now remember this. I believe Ray was a part of like that team that came up with this Team Marauders deck for like the World Championship, or was at least a part of that testing team that ended
Okay,
up having this Team Marauders deck. So this isn't just somebody who picked up the deck, got really good with it, and just had a good run over the weekend. This is someone that has been playing the Team Marauders deck, has been there kind of like from the ground floor, and has essentially built on the success that the deck had, at the World Championship, and maybe kind of fallen off from that time to now. But definitely showing that as long as you kind of know what's going on, you can kind of do your thing, and you are willing to go pretty deep with this deck. You can have some pretty good success, I would say. Finishing with a top four finish is very good when Team Routers themselves didn't really have that good of a tournament overall.
yeah. Like I said, we saw like 12% conversion rate. Four people made it into day two. One of those four players made it to the top eight and then to the top four. It is very hard to go, man, I just didn't do a good run. Like it's hard to be upset with yourself. Obviously, you won the first prize. You got the top eight, which is what really mattered, right? You got the Pro Tour invite. That's what like people cared about.
Yep.
Obviously, first place, second place, prize support, all that matters. But if you were going into like, if I told you that you're going to go play in the Spotlight Series and you're going to get guaranteed top eight, but you're going to lose in the first round of the top eight, you're not going to be like, well, shucks, I shouldn't even show up. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I can handle that. Like, no one's going to be upset with a top four run. Obviously, you're always going to like, as any Magic player, anybody who's competitively playing any kind of sport or card game or whatever you're going to, you always want to get first. That's just going to be like your human drive, human nature to want to get first, but you can't be upset with a top four.
Mm. Not in this big of a tournament. Like the record that
No.
you needed to even make the top eight, you were essentially had to be like X2. I think Gray was like the only person that had a draw that they could have made it into the top 8. So like and they ended up winning like their last round. So I think they were like 12-2-1 or like 12-1-1, some crazy like that. I don't know. Like 11-3-1.
Yeah,
Either
see,
way.
outside of like Scott and Nicholas were the only people who had draws that could do it because they were double drawing in on like the last 2 rounds.
Yeah,
Like,
you needed a really good record to make the top 8.
yeah, yeah. Anyone who couldn't intentionally draw, which was basically, I think, third through eighth couldn't intentionally draw in,
Mm-hmm.
was had to have a solid record. And I mean, even Doomwake was essentially was undefeated in day one and did not make it into day two, or made it into day two, but did not make it into the top 8. He was in the 20s, I believe, is what he ended up
He ended up
doing.
finishing 32nd.
32nd. Okay, so I wasn't sure where he finished at. I thought it was in the 20s. I was pretty close. So
The other player too that was undefeated on day, well, because technically Gray Payne was undefeated, but she was 8-0-1. Um, but I mean technically
yeah,
undefeated and was one of 2 undefeated players after the first round of day 2. But the other player that was playing mono white, I believe, also finished like somewhere in the 20s. I think maybe inside the top 20.
gotcha. Which is wild, right? Like you're undefeated in day one, and then end up being day two. You just like lose a couple matches and just go from like I'm definitely gonna be in the top 8 to like I hope I'm in the top 16.
Well, and remember too, like they started off day 2 with a win. They were the
Yeah,
first 10-0 player at the tournament. I mean, riding pretty high, and then I think they ended up finishing 11-3-1 or like 10-3-1. However, ended up shaking. I think they played like 6 rounds of 15. Yeah, something like that. Like 11-3-1 is like the record, which definitely
it's
sucks.
well, it's just wild, right? Like you played 15 rounds of Magic, and you're 11-3-1, and that's not a top 8.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I want to say it was like maybe somewhere in like the tens, maybe like 22nd at the worst, and I think up to like 12th. So, but I don't even think necessarily that high. I think it was a pretty hard fall off, I would say,
Yeah,
from being the number one overall, player after round 10, and then the wheels just kind of falling off from there.
yeah. But going on to the finals, it was Scott versus Nicholas. It was Zamir versus Gruel, and Gruel took it 2-1. Um, I'm not too surprised by that. Like I said, the Gruel deck was super aggressive. We're playing the red ley line. We are playing the best one drops to go along with that. We're playing the mouse and the scamp. Like we were built for speed. We were glass cannon built.
Hmm.
A little better than glass cannon because we had a little bit more like better protection spells. But we were definitely like we're definitely playing like a best of one type build, and we're gonna get there. We're just gonna make them have it every turn, and when they don't have it on the one turn, we're just gonna win.
And I'll retract my statement from earlier, where like overprotect, like having these hexproof cards, like kind of worse when you're playing against the nowhere to run. Nowhere to run, giving a creature -3/-3 is not very good when you have overprotect, which gives them that +3/+3 and
Yeah.
all those things. So that probably working a little bit in Nicholas's favor. Again, I would have to rewatch the finals because I don't even think I've actually watched the finals, but I would think on paper, Dimir Enchantments has some of the right things, and I think Nicholas just kind of like read the room right that, hey, this Nowhere to Run card is pretty good. Snakeskin Veil is going to be good probably 80 to 90% of the time. The other 10% of the time, Overprotect is going to be absolutely amazing. And in the worst case, it's a 2-mana Giant Growth that is also going to
It
allow my
gives
creature to win combat.
it gives trample too, which is huge.
Oh, it does give trample. Is it trample and indestructible? I thought it was like
Yeah, I think so.
hexproof. I thought it was hexproof indestructible and +3/+3.
I think it's hexproof and trample. Let's find
Hold
out.
on, we're gonna figure this out. Oh, I can't wait to merge into the alternate universe.
Uh, okay, Jesus Christ. So Overprotect is a 1 in a green instant. Target creature you control gets +3/+3, gains trample, hexproof, indestructible until end of turn.
Oh, okay, so it gets all 3 then. All
It's,
right.
it's all three. It's just like, what if we just gave it all?
Yeah, for 1 extra mana, not only do you get giant growth. I mean, you have giant growth and speed for 1 green mana. That's cool, but we add a 1 generic mana to it, and you just get 3 keywords onto your creature.
Yeah, you get hexproof, trample, and indestructible. That I knew it was trample and hexproof. I didn't realize it was indestructible. Yeah, that's gross.
And I was the opposite because I was like, I know this is hexproof and indestructible because it's like you're not killing. Essentially, like you are definitely not killing this thing. I didn't realize it gave trample.
No, I knew it gave trample because I looked at this card for infect.
That's even grosser. The fact that when you have these Ember Heart or Heartfire Hero Manifold Mouse starts that your opponent just goes like kill it and you're like nah, I'm gonna give it like double strike. Here's like a 6/6 double strike indestructible trampling hexproof creature.
Yeah, it's gross. It's gross. Welcome to Magic, folks. In case you've missed anything.
Go your turn.
But no, I definitely think Nicholas read the room correctly, as in doing this glass cannon type build. And I call it a glass cannon build because it is way more in on the pump spells and things of that nature. We're playing the ley line that is god awful any turn other than your opening hand. Type card. It is surprising that we've essentially come full circle, right? Like this is what we started off with, and then we kept working and working to be better against every other deck, and now we've gone full circle back to Leyline. And so it's kind of funny because you'll see this happen a lot in any sort of metagame, where you'll see a deck start off like this, and then we'll slowly start rotating to where, well, now we're good against these decks and these decks and these decks. What if we just go back to the original build? Isn't that better against like these decks that are expecting this build? And it's like it is, and that's why we've come full circle. So I applaud Nicholas. He came in, he saw, he conquered, he did what every Magic player wanted to do there. He did what 1,500 other players basically couldn't do. Congratulations. Um,
Mhm.
I'm annoyed because it has to be Gruul aggro. Like it's just, I feel like Gruul aggro has been not the best deck, but essentially the best deck in the format for the last like 12 years. It definitely hasn't been that long, but it just feels like that with how well aggro has been performing.
Yeah, I think going back to the World Championship last year in around October, I know going into that event, like Gruul Aggro was kind of this is the benchmark. This is the best deck going into the format. How is it going to perform going into there? And ever since then, for like a lot of these decks, it's just been, what can we build off whatever success we had at the World Championship? And so far, like Gruul Aggro, I would say has been the interesting one where it's kind of slowly started to see less and less play. And I think this is just the perfect tournament. I think that if people are going to be playing these spot removal spells and they're starting to shave on certain ones, that if you just play a version that is more explosive where your opponent's like, oh, I have like a turn or two, you just don't even give them the option of having another turn. It's have it now or you are dead. And like, look me in the eyes, like you do not live past this turn. Do you have anything? And if the answer is no, especially on turn one, if it's not cut down or anything, the game is over. So I think that, Nicholas, like you were saying, I think made a really good call. I think like overprotect as like one of those I would say, oh, what's the word I'm looking at? Like flex slot cards in the
Hmm.
main. Like this was just a very good call because we are playing Leyline. We can play just 8 pump spells that are just the 1 mana pump spells, and that's fine because we're going to be able to double them up anyway, and we can play more protection spells and have a little bit of utility if we do have a Leyline of Resonance in play. So I think just ultimately, altogether, was just a deck that, while still not very good against your opponent who is just mono removal, um, just ended up also being good in the cases where your opponent doesn't have straight up removal and having these cards where oh, I get to beat your hexproof spells. Well, no, you don't. With this card, I'm going to basically beat that card right now, and then whatever, if you do it later, my creatures are going to be big enough to survive your spells anyway. So hats off to him.
Yeah, like I said, I'm impressed. I'm happy he did what he did. I think Scott also had a wonderful run. They took a deck that essentially no one was on. I think it comes down to like it was like 1% of the meta, or like was a little less than like 1% of the meta was on enchantments or Demeanor enchantments, and clearly he took it to a wonderful run. You know, going uh, getting second place in a essentially 1,500 player tournament is nothing to sneeze at. Would he have rather gotten first place? Absolutely, everyone would have. But it's very hard to say, well, shucks, I only got second place. It's like, yeah, you didn't get first, but you put a new deck on the map. You had an amazing run. You clearly knew what you were doing. You had a sideboard plan for what you needed to have, and you lost to essentially a deck that you did not plan to face. No one, no one was playtesting Gruul aggro with red ley lines in it. Because I want to say since like the third or fourth week of standard, like Gruul wasn't playing the red ley lines. People learned that it's just a terrible top deck.
Hmm.
But Nicholas was able to put forward his deck and take down the entire tournament. So maybe there's something there. Maybe we're going to be going back to that. Time will tell. I mean, we still have it's all ebb and flows of the meta. I do think that Nicholas might be more of a one shot in the sense of like we're not going to see Gruul aggro, all of a sudden like come into playing always four. Excuse me, playing four of these enchantments, ley lines, playing more pump spells. I don't think it's gonna necessarily happen. I could be wrong. I've been wrong many times before. So we'll see what happens with it as a whole and how the meta develops. But I don't think that's going to be the new staying power or lasting power of the deck.
Yeah, probably going to be something that is pretty good in a tournament like this, where people probably really expected Gruul aggro to be one of the bigger archetypes, but then in preparing for it, it's like, how about I go kind of one step ahead? Like, you're gonna zig, so I'm gonna go zag, and while they kind of predict the zag, you end up zigging again. So probably, again, probably gonna be right. This probably isn't gonna be the norm, but it will be kind of interesting to see, because I'm sure we're going to see a lot of people jamming four ley lines into their Gruul decks and just kind of seeing what sticks.
Yeah, definitely see that happening. Be on the lookout for your next RCQ of someone playing that. Have a game plan for it. There's not really much you can do besides play more removal spells, stuff like that. So depending on your archetype, depends on what you can do. Just be wary of that. Um,
Hmm.
it could happen.
Also, give them give them a high five and a Red Bull, because that wheelbarrow carrying their metaphorical testicles is massive.
Yeah. Also, convince them to buy you a lottery ticket because their luck is going to be outrageously well. I just start with
For
Layla on
sure.
the field every game. I don't know why people kept cutting this card.
I kind of felt bad in like my RCQ here real quick, because there's like so many games where I just like played turn two like knight off of like five creatures, and I was just like, my hand didn't start out this way, and then like my draws were just awesome to set it up after.
Jesus.
Um, but I guess before we move off of this and we look at the actual win rates of most of these archetypes that major archetypes that took place at the event, I want to congratulate especially the players in the top eight. A great event just overall. A congratulations to the SCG staff, the all the players that ended up playing in the event. It just, I think overall was a good event, fantastic to watch. I think aside from all the technical difficulties on day one and my technical difficulties of speech right now, I think overall it was awesome, and I look forward to seeing what they do for coverage going further. What exactly announcers are going to get, which I believe for the modern one they have Mason Clark, Carmen Handy, and I think Ailey and Corey for that one. So definitely a lot of players that I think are really really good modern players doing that spotlight series. So that's going to be really cool.
Yes, I know. I think the next event they're doing though is going to be the RC in Portland is the next big
Yeah,
event coming up. So
here in the
looking forward,
U.S.
yeah, looking forward to seeing that RC and what happens as well. But yeah, I'm not always impressed with SCG, but they kind of set the standard for these type of events. If you go back like 5, 10 years now, they were the ones who like any given weekend you could see a Star City Games Open going on. You had good coverage team, you had um good gameplay going on. It was just if you couldn't be playing Magic that weekend, you could always tune in and watch Magic. And I'm looking forward to getting back to like what was the essentially apex of Magic, or essentially the I guess not apex of Magic, but the apex of like watching competitive Magic being played. And Star City definitely knows how to do that, and I'm hoping they get back to that point. Um, the only biggest problem I had was on day one, they were not prepared for how fast some of the matches were going. So, like when we saw Brian Kibler, I think it was round two.
That was round
He just
one.
got
That was the
it was
first
round one.
round, first round of the
Okay.
tournament.
So even worse, we watched Brian Kilbourne to get waffle stomped round one, which I mean it happens, right? Like everyone, you have the games where you get right. He was playing against Gruul. There, like I said, when Gruul just like keeps a mediocre to good hand and you stumble slightly, you just your deck looks like trash and Gruul looks like it's the best deck you could possibly play. We saw him basically just get waffle stomped game one or round one, and then we waited 15 minutes with commercials until we could watch more Magic, and that was definitely a misplay by them. Obviously, it happens. I do think this is something they need to be aware of, and obviously, because like that definitely is a great way to kill the vibe, kill the stream type situation where it's just like we've been waiting for 15 minutes to hopefully watch another game of Magic that's not going to take only 40 seconds to be over. So definitely need to like make sure they're doing their backup matches and things like that. I'm not sure why they didn't have that for round one, or at least a couple first rounds of the day. I'm not sure what happened there, where who dropped the ball, who did what. I don't know if they forgot that Gruul Aggro was a deck in the format that can just win in like 5 minutes or
Whoops.
what. But definitely just that was my biggest complaint. But I mean that is, by far not a super hard complaint. We see this happen with a lot of people who stream Magic where they don't necessarily have enough backup matches or things like that.
Yeah, I suppose. But enough of that. Let's go ahead. Let's take a quick look at these win rates. Kind of make some comments, and we'll put a nice bow and a nice cap on the Spotlight series in Atlanta. So here it is up there. You guys can all take a gander at it. I'll kind of run through really quickly. They just have the percentage of the field. Some of the best performing decks that we see here, at least towards the top, Dimir mid range, Gruul aggro. Again, these were the most played decks. They converted technically the most number of decks into day two. Dimir midrange, 52% match win rate. It's kind of what I would expect for a mid-range deck in the format. Gruul aggro bordering on about 54.5%, which of course ended up being the deck that put 3 copies in the top 8 plus the eventual champion.
That is getting a little too high for the amount of percentage that gets played too. Like when we start getting up to that 55 plus percentage, which we're basically there, that does start to border. Do we need to ban something possibly from this deck with how consistent it's doing?
Well,
I'm not.
depending. Yeah, go ahead.
I say I'm not calling for bans for Gruul aggro by any means. I'm not saying we need to ban the mouse or anything like that. I'm just saying that we are now getting into where it has a large meta share of the tournament and it has a high win percentage. Those are things that you don't want to have happen in the sense of like we're getting closer to that 60%. We're not at 60%. We're not like, crazy numbers. We're at 54.4, but it is something to notate moving forward looking at standard.
Right, yeah. Moving on to non doom and gloom, the Golgari mid range decks. Thankfully, nature is healing. Almost 9% of the field, and unfortunately, a 45% win rate. Not very good for the mid range decks. I would say if they're about like 50 to 52%, I think that's kind of what you would expect from them. Like you're just kind of hoping to convert a lot of those games. And Golgari, it just ain't it.
This is a miserable win percentage too. So like if this is like a 49%, you could argue player error, bad draws, variance type thing. But when you are 5% away from your 50% that you want to be at, horrendous. That is we've lost touch on some things.
Definitely not good for the not good for the Golgari mid range deck. You had a decent amount of people register it, and they mostly didn't do well. I think there was like one player that did pretty well with the Golgari deck, but most of the other people just did not have a good time.
No.
Esper Pixie, this one's going to be pretty interesting. So this is essentially the breakout deck. Broke out a few weeks ago. Seems like it's here to stay. 6.2% of the field and a 59% win rate. A match win rate of 59%, which is I mean, if this was double the percentage of the field, this would absolutely be problematic.
Yeah. This is Like, so if Esper Pixie had the same number that Gruul Aggro had, we would be talking about banning something out of Esper Pixie. We would at least be talking about we need to see how the meta adjusts first. Like, give it a couple weeks, and then do we need to ban something out of Esper Pixies? Would be the next conversation. Because that is like having a basically 60% win percentage and having a dominant percentage in the meta is not what you want. So we saw with, the energy deck in Modern just a few weeks ago, or just like a few months ago, things like that. That is not where you want to be. Obviously, low percentage of the field. So you're going to have this when you have a breakout deck, right? When any kind of deck does well, I don't kind of like nowhere, right? Because it was found out, the weekend before. So it's not too surprising to see it have a high win percentage and a low meta share. Now we'll see moving forward if, 80% of the people now convert over to Esper Pixie and it still has a 60% win percentage, we have some issues.
Yeah, and pretty easy for it to have that high of a match win rate with, when we looked at it, just under 50% of the people that played the deck ended up going from day 1 to day 2. And, I think they were just all hanging around like the top tables. Because I think if you look at the top 8 or the standings, I believe in like the top 16, there was a few Esper Pixie players. And if you go to the top 32, there was even more there as well. So, definitely, if Esper Pixie starts creeping up into like the double-digit metagame share, and we're still at like even go down to like maybe 58%, 58.5%, there's a point where okay, well now we have to actually see if the metagame will adjust to it, and if it's trying to and it just can't, or if it's too good, then it will get to the point where something has to be banned or something outside of it has to change.
Yeah.
Um, what else? Zur Overlords, 5.9% of the metagame, 52.4% fine. Mono white tokens, 5% of the field, 51.5% fine.
Their Overlords is just domain for anybody who doesn't know that.
Well, they can figure it out themselves. Do some reading. Do your own research. Mono red aggro, 4.3% of the field, just under 50% match win rate.
Play Gruul. Play Gruul.
Hey, you throw Copperline Gorge and Thornspire Verge into your deck, your win percentage goes up 5%. That's pretty good, I would say.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, just play Gruul. I don't understand. I don't understand these mono red players.
Technically 4.5%, but like whatever. Like, play the Gruul cards.
That's free 4.5%. You're looking at like spending $8 more. What are you doing?
Stonks, baby.
Anyway.
So then Jeskai Evoke, for me, like the most disappointing and maybe a little bit more disappointing than Gruul midrange or Golgari aggro, or what the fuck, mix them both up. Golgari midrange. Jeskai Evoke for about 4% of the metagame and a 46.2 match win rate. Match win rate. My brain is absolutely fried. I'm absolutely crashing out.
Yeah, it is wild because I definitely think Jeskai Convoke was good coming into this tournament. So I don't know if variance got the better of people, um, if people were just more prepared for Jeskai Convoke because it had been kind of upticking in the weeks. I don't know what happened to where Jeskai Convoke just decided to like shit the bed, but it did it at the worst time possible.
Yeah, it's unfortunate to see it because I do really like this deck. Of course, I just had a guide that I posted on my channel to kind of get people started, but definitely a terrible showing for this deck. But again, I think it's a deck that performs better than it actually puts up the results for.
Yeah.
So then we had Azorius Oculus kind of coming back from the dead, 3.3% of the field, and getting a just like actually just under a 50% win rate, which awesome for it.
That's where you want most of your decks to be. You want them to be at a 49 to a 51% win rate because that is basically at a 50% win rate, barring variance and player skill. And I will say, I think the reason why we've seen Azorius Oculus do so well is because of Golgari midrange dropping off so hard. So, I play tested Azorius Oculus when I first started going into the RCQ season. I really like the deck. I like Oculus as a card. I think it's fun to play, and I already had all the cards for it already. Basically, I think I needed to buy like 4 cards for it if I was going to play it fully. And when you ran into Golgari midrange, you just got smashed. It turns out that they have a lot of good Graveyard Hate main deck, and they were just out card advantaging you as well. And so now that Golgari is leaving, the only thing that really has good like Graveyard Hate as it stands right now is the Caretaker's Talent decks, the mono white decks, because they still play Rest in Peace. That's just hard Graveyard Hate. Everyone else is either maybe playing some Graveyard Hate or playing like a Ghost Vacuum or two that you can beat that. Like you can find a way to bounce that, destroy it, and then still combo off, or combo off by getting your cards back. You can't beat Rest in Peace is much harder to beat because you have to remove it and then start making graveyard and then going through and trying to win. So like with Golgari dropping off so hard, we saw Azorius Oculus explode. So not even like in this tournament, they didn't do like amazingly well. But if you go watch like my metagame video to plug my own channel, um, you'll see that it took down two different challenges this last weekend. It put up more numbers than it has in the last like 2 months combined. It just came out of nowhere, and people were like, "Oh yeah, this deck is good. Nobody's playing Graveyard Hate." Which is weird to me though, because I think that I would assume that Azorius Oculus wouldn't be that good into all these bounce decks. Where you're like, I'm gonna pay 1 mana to get my Azorius Oculus. That's cool. I'm gonna play 2 mana and bounce it back to your hand. Now you gotta pay 3 mana to cast it again. So I'm not sure what has like spurred this up besides Golgari dropping off the face of the earth. But it does seem like now is the time to play your Oculus if you're wanting to play it. There's just not Graveyard Hate around.
Amen. The last two, I'll make it pretty quick. The rest of the decks here, we have like Simic Terror, Temur Otters, Boros Mice. Those decks hanging around that like golden like 51 to like 49%. Some of them creeping on like 52, but with how much they're seeing play, that's a totally fine match win rate for those decks. The big ones. The big ones I want to talk about are the Selesnya Cage and the Dimir Mounts deck. Like Boros Burn, Golgari Ramp, extremely bad. 32%, 38%. That ain't it. The Azorius Curiosity deck, low percentage at 54%. I would say that's probably fine. That's probably again one of the aggro decks.
Yeah.
But Dimir Bounce, Selesnya Cage are kind of the two that we'll touch on here last. The Cage deck / Selesnya tokens, Dimir Bounce / the like weird Dimir mid-range kind of decks. Very little part of the metagame for this tournament, but almost 63% for Dimir Bounce, about 57.5% for the Selesnya Cage deck is just a massive win rate, almost regardless of how many people play it. Like we know there was like 12 Cage players, and like I think the Dimir Enchantments players were in the others, so maybe skewed a little bit more because obviously we had one Dimir Enchantment player play very, very well. We had another Selesnya Cage player that was 9-0 after day one. So maybe skewed a little bit, but nonetheless, they were decks that performed very well over the weekend, and then also seem like they have a lot of staying power in the early parts after this event.
Dimir Bounce, I'm curious to see. I think that this might be the new Dimir deck. Going forward, I'm not convinced that is the case yet, but I definitely feel like there's going to be a big tension between Dimir Bounce and Dimir midrange, and I'm curious to see which way people are going to go. Because I do think that Dimir Bounce kind of shores up some of the issues midrange has. Midrange obviously has some better game plan against the other decks than Bounce does, so we'll see, which way this ends up going. Well, I definitely could see where we're going to see a much larger percentage of Dimir Bounce just ticking up slowly. I think this coming weekend will be a good example of that. When we see the challenges, things like that, as long as you can play Moto,
True.
and we'll see kind of what happens there. Selesnya Cage, I think, is also one of those decks where it just doesn't see a lot of play, so people weren't necessarily prepared for it as a whole. It is a deck that you can not relatively easily beat, but you can beat pretty easily. It's not like hard to interact with as a whole. I think the biggest thing about Selesnya Cage is people learned how good the Recruiter of the Guard is, that bunny.
Mm-hmm.
the 2/1 that then you can pay 1 extra mana or 2 extra mana to Offspring, make another 1/1, and it has like whenever any other creature is targeted, you get to put counters on things. So if you have those two out and you have like a high value target that needs to get killed, you're gonna be able to put two counters on something else. It's just it pumps up your team a lot. It helps work again work with the cage by being able to get those different mana values going for you. It is just a pain in the ass to deal with, and especially when you have all these bounce decks running around. That's super annoying to deal with then, because now you have to bounce the bunnies first before you bounce the other things, and it gets weird. Saying this as someone who has played against the cage deck a couple times now, the recruiter is definitely the most annoying card out of that deck. Now, obviously, when they get to turn 3, just put an Overlord into play. That's the worst case scenario possible. I luckily got to dodge that most of the time by controlling the board, or when they were able to do that, they didn't have it on the cage. They're not always going to have it, so I was lucky in that regard. I was definitely they activated cage, and I was just like, "We're going to game 2," and they did not reveal an Overlord from their cage. Like, okay, we can keep playing. But I was 100% ready just to scoop up on that turn. I was like, it's your turn 3, my turn 2. If you put an Overlord into play, I'm scooping. I cannot beat that. I was like, I will just go to game 3. It's fine, buddy. You got it.
They just wanted it more.
Yeah, they didn't want it enough. But I do think that the Cage and Dimir Bounce being essentially not the Cage is not a new deck, but no one's been playing it, right? Like no one's really been championing this deck. Now it's obviously on everyone's radar. Jim Wake, was able to go 9-0 on day 1, undefeated. That definitely says the deck is at least somewhat good. Whether it was the pilot, whether it was the matchups, whether it was luck and variance, something went right. So clearly the deck is not, trash. And then Dimir Bounce is just numbers might be a little skewed because, like we said, one of the players did get into the top 8 and into the finals. So I'm not sure about that percentage. I don't know how many people were actually on that deck. We'll have to see more on that.
Who's Seymour? No, yeah. So overall, to kind of wrap up, this was, I think, a net positive for competitive Magic as a whole.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I know I've gotten people like in my comment section and stuff talking about how we need to cut off standard, we need to cut off modern, basically these other constructed formats. Who cares? Like if these die, Magic will not die, but something like Commander, if that goes away, then basically Magic is dead. And obviously there's a whole different argument for which format's more popular or maybe what brings in the most money, whatever it is. But
Kill
for
Commander.
but for competitive Magic as a whole, and I think this like rings true as it has for the entire time that Magic has been around. If standard is very good and is desirable and people want to play it, it is the tide that will raise all the ships a lot higher than, unfortunately, what something like Modern and Pioneer can do. And right now, Standard is great and probably the best it's been in years. And it's a format that you should be playing right now. And as long as it's doing good, Magic, competitive Magic as a whole, and Magic in general is going to be better for it. So definitely this event has definitely showcased that Standard is back. It is indeed back. It is worth investing in. It is worth playing. And with it being now the majority of the RCQ seasons going forward, where, it kind of shares it with Modern, that is definitely proving, at least in the short term right now, to be a very, very, very good idea, considering Pioneer's like a pile of dog shit right now. But nonetheless, that Standard is going to be the premier competitive format is paying off greatly right now.
Rakdos did nothing wrong.
Rakdos continues to do everything wrong. Ban Blood Crypt.
Oh, I love the conversations for Rakdos. Rakdos has just consistently been dominant in Pioneer, and we do nothing to stop it because it's a fair mid-range deck. That's not a reason to ban anything out of it. And it's just like it continues to destroy the format every time. We fix something in Pioneer, and Rakdos is like, hold my beer. I can ruin this.
Yep.
I'm thoroughly convinced we could ban Blood Crypt, and Rakdos would be like, hold my beer. We're still gonna ruin the format. Don't worry. Don't worry. We had a contingency plan. I'm convinced Rakdos is just like Amulet Titan and Modern, where they just have an actual contingency plan written down for like, what if they ban this card? Well, we just pivoted to this. What about that?
Yep.
We have a pivot. What if they ban Amulet Titan? We have a pivot. Like
We know what
I'm
we're doing.
convinced. I'm convinced at this point that like no matter what you ban for Rakdos, they have a pivot point, just like Amulet Titan. I'm almost thoroughly convinced that if Amulet Titan loses Amulet, it will still somehow be the best deck in the format. They're just gonna pivot that hard.
I could see it.
But that's my little tangent. But no, I do think Standard is in a great place. Competitive Magic as a whole is in a great place. Um, Modern's still being shaken up and figured out. Energy's still looking good, but not nearly as dominant as it once was. Don't let the MTG result or MTGO results fool you. When we look at paper events and things like that, we see a lot more diversity than what we're seeing in the online meta itself. Um, Pioneer is not a real format, so it doesn't matter. And Legacy is not a real format, so it doesn't matter.
Amen.
But modern and standard are looking good, and standard's definitely in a healthy position as of now. We still have a bunch of sets coming out this year, so we can still ruin it. Give it time.
True. Not anything important this month getting released, but next month we will be getting Aether Drift, and hopefully we can get a few more spoilers for it. It's been kind of nice not having any spoilers and stuff, and not really having to worry about a lot of it aside from like Innistrad Remastered.
Yeah, I'd say we're not going to really cover Innistrad Remastered. It's all cards that already exist. Basically, it's just new arts, old borders, or not old borders. What's that called?
We're talking about like just like retro
Retro.
or
Yeah, retro. They have like retro frames, new full arts, things like that. Um, if you don't know, Innistrad Remaster is also being priced at a premium price for the set too. I don't think it's worth it. There's not a lot of value in that set, in my opinion. Um, that's just me. I don't know how the other people feel, but I don't think there's enough true value to be had in that set to justify like, paying $10, $12 a pack. We'll see what happens, obviously. Maybe prices will adjust based off of player demand, but I don't see there being a reason to, especially with like some of the reprints we're seeing. One of the only like big reprints I really liked seeing is the 13 mana Emrakul the Promised End.
yep.
That definitely needed a reprint, so I'm happy to see that get reprinted. But in my opinion, there's not much else outside of that. Obviously, there's some like cheeky commander cards and stuff that are worth like $10, $20 are seeing a reprint, which is nice as a whole. But we're not seeing like any high value outside of Emrakul the Promised End and the Soren Markov commander card. I can't remember what it is. He's a
Edgar
three color, yeah.
Edgar Markov.
Edgar Markov, yeah. He's being reprinted, which I know the Commander community is super happy about because I think he was like a $50 or $60 commander or something like that.
I think more expensive than that now, even, which is
Okay.
crazy.
I thought he was more expensive, but I didn't want to like blow it out of proportion because I know commander cards are weird. They're either like $1 million or they're like 10 cents. And the cards that you think would be 10 cents are somehow a million. The cards you think would be a million are somehow 10 cents, at least in my evaluation of cards. And it bugs the shit out of me because I can't evaluate commander pricing on cards.
Well, you and me can either both be wrong, or both be right. And yeah, the Commander 2017 Edgar Markov is $90 medium price, with the Judge one getting for $155.
Yeah. And I know they're making like serialized version of him and all this other fun jazz. I'll probably end up opening like a collector booster of this set. Like I will, as in literally, I will open up one collector booster of this set. Hope to hit something spicy, not, and then just be sad I wasted like $30.
Whoopsies.
That's gonna be about the most I open up of this set. Because there's just nothing I need from this set. I know you're gonna be looking out for your young wolves.
Yes, please. Thank you. Yogg players,
Yes.
rise up and rejoice.
Yeah. But there's not too much to talk about for that set, I think, as a whole. Like I said, there's some good value in it for reprints, but not enough to justify, I think, the prices they're wanting to ask for the set itself.
Yeah, a probably cool limited format really old cards that probably need reprints that are getting this kind of new treatment, which I think kind of for me goes into a little bit of a conspiracy where I think we're going to see more remastered sets kind of come up, and it's going to be kind of a reason to take these cards that are popular that maybe need reprinting, and you can slap a premium price on them, and then you're also going to be able to get different variants and stuff of them, which might even overall just actually help the price of the older cards, for the fact
Yeah.
like, hey, look, here's the movie poster version of Emrakul the Promised End. Like, I don't want to play the regular version, I want to play this one. So a lot of the brokies like myself just like, sweet, I can play Emrakul the Promised End now, I just don't get the cool art.
Yeah. Definitely, it will definitely help the prices overall, and like it's good as a whole. I just think that it should not be the premium price they're asking for, in my personal opinion.
Yeah.
Because as I always say, it doesn't matter what they're reprinting, cards cost the same to print no matter what.
Yeah, and really, the thing you're probably gonna end up paying for. I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily worth opening. It's just like buying a box and opening it, but I'm sure the limited experience is going to be immaculate, like it has been for a lot of the sets that have been released, and just a very overall like nostalgic for a lot of people, while also giving cards that kind of modern treatment of just these sweet different styles that we've seen from like different secret layers and just in different sets in general. So
Yeah,
something neat.
but I'm looking forward to the Ace Adrift set. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with that. I'm really looking forward to having vehicles back. They're so fun and interesting. Said no one. Um,
I'm really interested in the Wacky Races secret layer that's going to come out alongside of Aether Drift. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily a boomerang kid, but I'm here
yeah,
for chaos.
yeah. I'm curious to see what happens. I'm curious to see what we get out of that set. I'm curious to see what they do with it as a whole. It'll be interesting, and I actually have to care about these sets because standard is going to be, a thing for the next like RCQ coming up, or this RCQ season, then the next RC, and then after that we'll have a modern RCQ and RC, and then standard again. So I have to care about standard and what's going on in it. So it'll be interesting to see. That's like I said, I'm looking forward to it because new cards, changing meta, seeing what happens.
Yes.
But
Well,
I think that's everything, right?
yeah, I think we went over everything. I think this is about the time where usually I do the intro. I'm just staring at Greg in the background over there doing
So
his thing.
comfy.
Alrighty. That's gonna do it for this episode of the Casual Spikes podcast. It was a long one, so if you stuck around to the end, give yourself a pat on the back. You are an absolute soldier, and you deserve roughly like one melted candy corn on your next dessert at an Applebee's. But if, like I said, if at any point you were interested in anything that was going on, you enjoyed yourself, you learned something, anything like that, again, please consider subscribing to the channel, supporting the channel in that way, ring notification bell, so you know when future episodes get posted. Of course, check out mine and Randy's channel where we talk about Magic the Gathering over there in our own very special and unique ways, and that's a nice way of putting it. Um,
Yeah.
um,
Also, let us know in the comments down below. Was there anything that surprised you with the Spotlight series? What you surprised? What deck won? What decks didn't do well? Or did you expect something else to be there? What you are playing in standard? We just like any kind of interaction you want to give to us. We will gladly take it. We are trying to get people to actually interact. It one helps with the algorithm, and two, we like to talk to the people that actually listen to our podcast.
I mean, for me, the algorithm reason's like third, but Randy just is a slut for engagement.
I am. I like engagement.
Just
I like
letting
it
it
when people
fly.
talk to me. It's interesting. Listen, I was an only child growing up. I didn't get a lot of people to talk to me.
I might as well have been an only child because I hated my siblings.
What's that? What's that? No.
The one. But again, hope you guys all enjoyed the episode this week. Next week, we'll see. We'll see. It's gonna be kind of us flying by, probably doing some predictions and getting ready for the regional championships that are going to be coming up in the coming weeks. Because I believe there is one before the one in February, I
Yeah,
think.
there's one on the one of 25th. It's the European one.
So
Okay, I've been following European Twitter essentially. Because there's a couple of different people who are playtesting rhinos and stuff, and they're having some decent results. So I want to see how well they end up doing as a whole. I also want to see, what this will be a good chance to see what happens before I have to play an RC.
Amen. Well, all right, everyone. Hope you all have a good rest of your night, day, afternoon, or whatever the case may be. I hope that burrito that you're choosing to eat is the tastiest burrito that you've ever had, because I ate like a 5 pound one from Chipotle the other day, and that was immaculate. And I hope you get the same experience that I got at that time. And hope to see you all back here for episode 30 of the Casual Spikes podcast. See ya.
Peace.
Yee.